Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto teaches at rwby. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by KenzoXShuyita and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1 Start. It was the last class for the day and it was the one most anticipated by the majority of the first years. All of the students had changed out of their official attire and into more comfortable clothing to allow for range of motion. They were all headed to one of the largest rooms in the academy. The arena. Inside, a few teams were already seated on bleachers that extended for 20 rows, allowing for plenty of spectators if the occasion allowed for it. It extended in a semicircle above the circular arena, which stood a few feet above the lowest level in the room. There were a few other circular arenas in the room, but it was clear from the get-go that the one in the center, the largest one, was the main attraction. Excited chattering hummed throughout the large room. This was what they really came to this school for. Not for the history lessons, the math talks, or the admittedly delicious food, but for combat. There was a contagious buzz that continued to spread from one student to another. Team STRQ, with their leader Summer Rose, was seated near the middle of the pack. She was a young teenager with red hair and silver eyes as her most recognizable traits. A short nose, wide-set curious eyes and slightly pudgy cheeks with baby fat adorned her innocent face. Summer was shyly sitting with her legs shut together and her body was slowly folding in on itself as more and more students walked in to fill the empty spaces. Before long, it was as if a black hole had formed in the pit of her stomach, dragging the rest of her towards it. A slap on the middle of her back broke her out of her funk momentarily. Looking around, she caught sight of her new teammate Tayang, holding his thumb up in his attempt to reassure her that it'll all be fine. She thought of the fellow teammate as brashly confident, but she couldn't help but find his bravado comparable to a bright light that she wished to follow. His smile lit up his entire face, pulling at his cheeks to show slight dimples and merry dark blue eyes. His blonde hair framed around the top of his head clearly unkempt as two strands stuck out at the crown. Despite his rugged looks, she found that teen strangely charismatic, especially with his taller and broader stature. She smiled gratefully, but couldn't help still feeling nervous. However, she would be saved from thinking about any more negative thoughts as a voice boomed from below them all. Good evening, students. All talking ceased as all eyes were drawn to where the voice originated. I will be your professor for the combat class for this year at Beacon Academy. I see that many of you are dressed for combat. Great. Blue eyes squinted minutely as the person in the center of the training room tried to formulate his thoughts. A moment later, his warm voice echoed again, my primary form of combat is hand-to-hand, and it's actually one of the few things I take pride in. The wide smile that stretched to his cheeks, pulling against skin. The 3 stripes of thick Sharpie on each cheek was only further emphasized by the smile that was brimming with excitement. I hope we can be friends and get along. The blonde man, no, teenager, stood proudly in his black tracksuit outfit. It was fitted well and allowed for breathing room and was decorated with vertical white lines that starkly contrasted with the blackness of the jacket and sweats. His hands were on his hips and his chest puffed out. A figure of absolute confidence or absolute ego stood eagerly as he scanned across each row of students. His ocean blue eyes mirthfully flicked from side to side, his spiky yellow hair shifting softly with each motion. Now, I'm sure that you have some questions. Are you really our professor? You're kind of young, no? A rough voice with a crass tone asked. The blonde instructor glanced over to look at the student that had spoken out of turn. Yes. I am your professor, Naruto Uzumaki. And I believe I am the same age as you all, so I believe that makes all of you young, no? He retorted, a teasing smile daring the student to say something back. Nothing of the sort happened. Instead, hushed murmuring restarted. It does say that our instructor for the class is Professor Uzumaki. He's so young, though. Did I really come to Beacon and train my ass off for this? This is a joke. Raven didn't partake in the whispers and glanced over at her brother. Crow, dressed in gray sweats and a loose-fitting white shirt, gave her a noncommittal shrug. He was thinner than Tayang and everything about him seemed sharp. His eyes, narrowly drawn, held inquisition and curiosity, but also disbelief and a lack of care. His nose was long and refined and jaw was as clearly defined as his straight thin lips. He looked down at the professor and raked his hand through his gelled hair, slicking it further back. One bunch of hair refused to remain, however, and rebounded to the front of his temple. He scoffed derisively. Beats me. She suppressed a growl and crossed her arms, her right hand tapping against her left bicep. She came to Beacon to learn how to fight against huntsmen. But here they were, making them all sit and listen to someone that was their age. Hardly worthy of her or her brother's trust. Alright. That's enough. The blonde started cheerfully, as if he hadn't heard any of the disparaging comments. Once again, all eyes returned to him and he crossed his arms against his chest. I said that I pride myself in hand-to-hand combat. If any of you can beat me, I'll submit my resignation to the headmaster by the end of the day. Tayang grinned eagerly at the challenge. Then I challenge you. Tayang shouted immediately from his spot next to Summer. This was his chance to create a reputation for himself. And it was coming so soon. His first day of learning at Beacon, and an opportunity had already shown itself. Naruto simply beckoned him forth. The other blonde with slightly darker hair with less spiky ends, grinned overconfidently, thought Raven, and jumped down the bleachers and straight into the arena so that they were standing face to face, only a foot apart. You know, Tayang said looking down Naruto, it's funny. I also pride myself on close quarters combat and would love to try my luck against you. The trusting, unblemished grin remained perfectly in place on Naruto's lips as he looked up at Tayang, who was easily 6 inches taller than he. Great. He breathed out. Then, he pulled out his scroll and began to press some buttons. You know how this works? He finally thought to ask. Yeah. Tayang Xiaolong. The professor started to press keys on his scroll. Lem know when you're ready, buddy. A few more seconds passed. Suddenly, both of their faces showed on a screen near the ceiling. A bright bar fully filled immediately came into life below their face and names, indicating their aura levels. Before we start, Naruto spoke as he put his scroll away in his pocket, I want to set some guidelines. Whatever you say, Tayang said good-naturedly. He was confident in himself, and he was especially confident in his fighting prowess. He had always been top of his class in combat, despite a few mishaps and his teacher's warnings about his overconfidence. A few ground rules wouldn't change anything. Different place, same results. At least that's what he thought. Naruto's eyes locked onto Tayang's good-naturedly. Firstly, come at me with the intent to kill. Deafening silence. Tayang was starting to think that maybe some things didn't remain the same. Any other rules? He asked after a moment of hesitation. Nope, that's it. Naruto answered, popping the P with his eyes closed, curved upwards in the height of amusement. It was as if this was all a huge game to him. Alright, ready when you are. Tayang wasted no time, rushing forward. Experimentally, he threw 2 jabs at his opponent's face. When those didn't hit, he tried again with 2 jabs with his left hand and then switched to a right straight punch. The first 2 were casually dodged and the last was simply flicked away with the back of a hand. Whoa, seriously? Did you just tap my punch away? Tayang asked with a bewildered smile as he continued his assault. Realizing that the so-called professor might actually have more skill than he gave him credit for, Tayang sped up and incorporated kicks and spinning attacks. When that didn't result in any landed hits, he channeled his aura throughout his body to further empower his muscles and speed up his strikes more. There. In his offensive blitz, Tayang spotted a hole in the defense of his opponent. Feinting with left punch to the side of the head, he switched suddenly into a spinning kick straight to the ribs. A bit gullible, no? Tayang's leg was caught in an enclosed hand wrapped around his ankle. The blonde jumped up suddenly and kicked Tayang's chin, sending him careening through the air. Grunting loudly from the impact both from the kick and the floor, the student rolled and recovered quickly onto his feet, sliding with the momentum until it died, and he stood at the edge of the arena. Seriously, you think that's gonna stop me? Tayang goaded, rubbing his chin with the back of a hand. Naruto simply flicked his eyes up. Following his gaze, Tayang widened his eyes. His aura was hit for over half of his capacity. That can't be right. There's no way that that simple kick had hit me for that much weight. How much did I do to him? I know that I haven't hit him, but blocking has to cost him something, right? To his chagrin, he realized that there wasn't a blip on his opponent's bar. Nothing changed from the start of the fight as Naruto's aura level remained untouched. I believe that concludes our spar. As you are now in the yellow, I deem you unable to continue combat and ask you to return to your seat. If you want pointers, feel free to come to my office hours. Shocked, Tayang blankly nodded and turned around without saying anything further. A minute later, he silently took his spot next to his team leader, his eyes still glazed over slightly in shock. Not a single hit, really? What had gone wrong? A smack to his back shook him out of his thoughts. Looking over to his team leader, he saw her shyly giving him a shaky smile and a jittery thumbs up. His eyes softened, deciding to think about it later. Alright, who's next? And again, the one and only rule is come at me with the intent to kill. Raven Branwen decided then and there that there was something odd about the combat instructor. It's not that he was weak. In fact, far from it. From what she could tell, their combat instructor for the year had shown enough promise that she would allow herself to listen to him and to take his advice. After all, she came here to learn how to protect the tribe from huntsmen, and this would be as good a starting point as any other. It couldn't be that he was a strange person, either. There were plenty of people that had quirks, especially in risky businesses. Huntsmen were no different in this category, and the culpability all lied in the fact that they could die any day. One day, they would be bright as the sun's rays on a clear day, and the next, they'd be ebbing embers on a misty night that would transition into rain. That said, telling his students to come with the intent to kill was definitely one of the stranger, yet acceptable advice she had heard today. Her eyebrow rose, and her right index finger began tapping thoughtfully against her right bicep again. Currently, their blonde combat instructor was in a mock battle against one of the students. Much like the previous skirmishes, the blonde was taking the defensive for the majority of the time, casually and smoothly ducking, weaving, and guiding blows away from his body. Everything he did was calm and composed, as if he could tell where the next blow was coming before the student even began to wind up to attack. She seriously began to question how far ahead the blonde could see when even she thought one of the students would attack with an overhead kick, only to realize it was a feint to reveal a stomach blow with her fist. And yet, the blonde had already placed his hands in position to defend his midsection, and his palms parried the blow perfectly. If there was a way to describe his defense, it would be efficient. The instructor would be carefully eyeing his student and calling things out if he felt there was an egregious misstep on the part of the student. After 3 such mistakes, however, he would suddenly flip onto the offensive, and the efficient defender transformed into an equally efficient assailant. Almost a third of the girl's aura was out in 10 seconds, and skirmish was forced to end then. The girl shakily got up, ignoring the blonde's proffered hand. Then, scoffing in her hubris, she turned around and walked up to her seat, refusing to say anything further. It confused Raven. The professor, she had yet to realize she had already placed that title on him, had clearly proven his strength. 18 students later, and he had yet to take a single grazing touch to his body. The only connection made during combat was when the professor redirected blows away from his body, unbalancing his opponent or creating glaring openings for himself, or when he struck decisively, generally ending the fight 10 seconds after the first strike. What an interesting individual. Anyone else? The professor looked up, his hands once again at his hips. His breathing was completely in control, as if he hadn't taken down 18 trained students back to back without a single breather. Each of them had thrown themselves at him with gusto after realizing from the first spar that he was not to be taken lightly. Each of them wanted to be the one to take him down. This goal slowly shifted into wanted to be the first one to land a hit. However, no matter what each student threw at him, nothing stuck. Every student he had faced was well versed in their own style of hand-to-hand, something they had trained in their previous school and possibly with their families, but it all amounted to nothing but air against the sole figure in the center of the arena. Looking around, Raven realized no one else was raising her hand. All of the gusto had gone with that last girl, who she recognized as one of the more talented recruits to Beacon. Apparently, said girl had won a few competitions in Mistral and a fighting competition, enough to the point that even the majority of the other students recognized her. She only knew through hearsay. If that's the case. She raised her hand. I would like to challenge you, she spoke out. The instructor paused, his eyes raising until it set upon hers. She felt naked under his gaze, as if he were carefully picking her apart, scrutinizing her as if she were data, and devouring that informing like a beowulf. Suddenly, the pressure disappeared as he smiled, and she wondered where that uncomfortable encroaching feeling had even come from. Come on down then, please, he called for her, pulling out his scroll in preparation. What's your name? She walked down to the bottom of the viewing area and leaped off, landing at the edge of the arena. Raven Branwen. He heeded her by tapping against his scroll again. Soon, a humming above her confirmed that her face, name, and aura gauge were set on a screen. Looking up, she saw his tantalizing aura gauge still at full. She smirked. A challenge for sure. You know the rules, right? The blonde asked as he set aside his scroll in his pocket. Come at me. With the intent to kill, right? She asked from behind him, her body already in motion to strike the back of his head. Who cares if he hadn't said start yet? He never had beforehand. Every student had given him time to prepare, even though they knew that he wouldn't say start and, scarily enough, that he was the same age and bested every single one without a single strike affecting his person. The way she saw it, he was purposely giving them a free advantage to get a jump start. Preemptive strike sometimes can decide a fight right from the very beginning. It wasn't uncommon for a single, decisive blow knocking out an unsuspecting individual, effectively ending a fight before it began in one-on-one duels. After all, aura can only help so much, especially if caught unaware. However, the thing that caught her attention more was the fact he told him to attack him with the intent to kill. Was he stating that he was so far above their level that an unchecked ferocity and aggression would be the only way to even approach threshold and breach his defenses? If so, she would take up on his advice. She would not hesitate and go for every strike with a lethal manner. She was trained to survive, after all, and death was no stranger to her. Her smirk slipped away when her punch struck air, the blonde's body already leaning to the left and turning towards her. She wouldn't give him the chance. She kicked low, trying to prevent him from turning and cutting off his mobility. Yet, her hopes were dashed as he jumped, as if he had eyes on the back of his head or an incredible sixth sense. Now, they were face to face, and her preemptive strike advantage had been shredded. The smirk on the blonde's face told her that he knew exactly what she had tried to do. But the expression didn't seem condescending in any way, other than beckoning her to come forth and give it her all. She felt a tug in her gut. He wanted her to succeed. "Fine, if that's what you want," she shouted, her eyes narrowing with exertion as she used her aura to fuel her body and speed up her strikes. Her fists blurred, and then her body lined across the arena as she circled around the arena, striking at every angle that she thought there was a momentary lapse in defense. Yet, every time she struck, the blonde was prepared. Every punch he allowed to whiff by with the barest of margins, every kick was blocked with ease. He had yet to go on the offensive. With the intent to kill, right? After trying to attack from his back, she crouched when Naruto threw a punch for the first time. She had made 3 mistakes, at least according to him. She frowned and backflipped away to make some distance, creating space between the two within a second. Skidding on the ground, she bent her knees and placed all of her force into the soles of her feet. Raven went straight for the front, now that Naruto had turned to face her, blitzing forward with all the momentum she could. She placed all of her intent behind this punch, aiming straight at his face. His hands were already in place to block her strike. Right before her fist ended up slamming into his palms and rendering her offense a moot point, she retracted her arm and tucked in her body, twisting on her right foot and turning so that her left foot shot out like a bullet towards his stomach. She felt something that felt like skin and looked over her shoulder in shock, only to meet the eyes of her opponent, who was looking at her with slightly widened eyes. She looked down and saw that her foot had been caught by his left palm right at the heel, killing off all of the force. Raven wanted to curse aloud. She pulled her leg away and jumped back, creating some distance from the instructor and preparing to strike again. However, when Naruto's surprised expression refused to slide away, she allowed herself a single quirked eyebrow. He started, a strange inflection as he spoke to her. He paused, a gap in the air as muted shock filled the air. "You have potential," he told her decidedly. She dropped her arms and straightened her back instinctively. Immediately after, she shook her head and growled. "The hell do you mean?" "Look up," was his simple instruction. Slowly, she did, and she found why the blonde was so stupefied. She was equally shocked. There, right below her name, her aura level was nearing the red from how much she had forced her body to its limits. But next to her name was Naruto's, and under his name was his aura level. 99.8%. The feeling of accomplishment strangely bloomed in her chest. She knew it was something that seemed incredibly off-putting and would generally be seen as insufficient. Before this class, she would have agreed that taking 0.2% off someone's aura was something ridiculous. Not at all something to be proud of. But that was then, and this was now. The person in front of her was an absolute monster at close quarters. Untouched in all 19 fights before hers, but now slightly affected by her advances. 0.2%. She smirked, her pride forcing her to stand tall. "You like that?" she prompted, her eyes filling with challenge. Naruto shook himself out of his stupor, tossing the cobwebs in his head into the mental trash and flashed her the brightest smile she had seen. "Good job." He praised her. And it was completely heartfelt. She could tell. Another feeling that blossomed from her chest spread across her body, slightly thawing her icy cold exterior. Apparently, he very much liked that she was able to surprise him, even if it were only for that fleeting moment. Maybe that's what was so strange about this kid. Everything he did was genuine and done with the other person's interests in heart and mind. Usually, she would deem someone like that weak. But she couldn't call this person weak. Not when he was simply so much farther in combat prowess than anyone she knew. "Alright, I'll end our spar there for now. Feel free to join your teammates and allow me to get on to lecturing the rest of the numbskulls, Dadabeo. If you ever feel like sparring again or getting some tips, again, come to my office hours." She idly nodded. What an odd instructor. "You were so cool." Summer shouted, absolutely beaming. The team leader was all excitement, like a dog that had spotted its owner holding some prime chicken. Raven squashed the instinctive desire to clutch her ears. She had long regained her composure. "It was nothing. I barely forced him to do anything, even with my best efforts." The shorter girl pulled back and marched forwards a bit and then turned around and began to walk backwards so that she was facing Raven. "Aw, don't be like that. You saw how insane he was. Maybe he's just a god at hand-to-hand and isn't as proficient with weapons. Oh, maybe that's when we can shine, huh?" Maybe, Tayang grumbled. Crow chose not to say anything to comfort the other male in the team, still miffed about the prank Tayang had pulled on him prior, telling him that the school skirt was a kilt and a combat outfit at that. Prick. See if he cared. "I'm sure you'll get him next time, Tayang. You almost had him." Summer cheered him on. I was gonna say that. Crow cried mentally. Narrator. He really wasn't. Tayang lifted his eyes from the ground at his shuffling feet to his team leader and barely managed to give her a weak smile. He had always been good at close-quarter combat, and yet there was another blonde shorter than he, not only better than he was at it by a significant margin, but also a professor at the esteemed Beacon Academy. Maybe I don't know. Beating a professor seems like a ridiculous prospect. Ah. Silence quickly descended and the four walked like that the rest of the way to the dorms. Despite how easily he had dealt with every student, Naruto still had yet to get the approval of the first-year student body as a professor. Sure, they acknowledged his strength, but accepting him as an official staff member and a professor at that seemed to be too warped for some people's minds. Raven couldn't understand the logic of the students here. The strong survive and the weak die. That's how the world worked. Their instructor was obviously not weak, placing him in the former category. She didn't know many huntsmen, but she did know that she was not weak. She had trained from a young age to obtain strength, and it wasn't simply by choice. That was her lifestyle. It formed who she was. Something like accepting that Naruto was strong as a fact was as simple as breathing to her. Stupid students. The fact he was young was looking like an unsurmountable obstacle for the blonde. That and the 3 Sharpie lines he had drawn on each cheek. She didn't care much for it, but perhaps the faunus and the faunus haters would. If Naruto was a faunus, then the faunus haters would bash on him. If he weren't, then the faunus would question why he would draw lines on his cheeks like that of a fox. She shut her mind off. It was only the first day. Raven Branwen contented herself in the forced silence of the group as they walked by a garden, then a walkway made of cobblestones and pebbles fused with cement and into the halls of the dorms. As they approached their door, the day's exhaustion seemed to finally seep in and weigh down on their shoulders. The moment their dorm room door was opposed, they filed through and crashed on their respective beds. I'm beat, Crow grumbled. Tayang gave him the stink eye. You didn't even try to fight. I got literally beaten. That kick to the chin was crazy. The Ashen blonde rubbed the bottom of his chin, making sure it was all intact. That's your problem, Crow retorted. Tayang rolled his eyes. I want cookies, Summer interjected, completely derailing the conversation. Beet milk and sugar and all that good stuff, and then yeah, some cookies will bring me back to life. Maybe I'll go to the kitchen, she yawned. Later. No one else spoke, and before long, Crow, Tayang, and Summer had all fallen asleep, completely forgetting about her original plan to eat sweets. Raven remained awake, looking out into the sunset as the sun slowly faded away to hide beyond the horizon, and the night soon to come to replace it with its blanket of stars. She entered a trance as she thought of her clan. They told her to come here, to Beacon, to learn how to fight huntsmen. Ridiculous, she had thought. Not so much now. Naruto had proven her wrong. Everything starts from hand to hand. Until you understand how your body works, how can you extend that into a weapon? She had no doubts that he was well versed in whatever weapon he chose to specialize in. There was so much to learn. Her eyes narrowed, the red in them shimmering in the dark. There was so much to learn here. Professor Uzumaki did say he had office hours. Chapter end. Chapter 2 start. Team STRQ trudged through the dorm hallways, shuffling their feet with heavy footfalls, dragging their toes against the ground between each step. It was only the second day, but waking up at 7 a.m. to prepare for the day had taken a toll on them after their first day 12-hour schedule. Granted, the majority of the classes first delved into the syllabus and the beginning portion of whatever subject was at hand, so a good portion of the classes were spent getting to know the teacher and understanding what was to be expected of them as students for the semester. But that completely ignored the combat class, which was the last class of the day. There was no syllabus for combat. Naruto had seen it quite fitting for the rest of the students who had not taken a proverbial beatdown from his own hands the day before to perform calisthenics. That, by itself, would not have been so daunting a task. A normal calisthenics workout would have been as easy as breathing for huntsmen and would have been no more than a light warm-up for the majority of the first-year Beacon students. After all, they were mostly here for combat training and practically in an elevator school to obtaining licenses and jobs as future huntsmen. Recognizing this, Naruto told them. Wait here. I need to bring some weights. 20-pound weights on each limb, with no aura allowed to augment their strength. And if that wasn't bad enough, Naruto had placed more weights on anyone that was in better shape than expected until that student was struggling as equally as all the others. Within 5 minutes of the workout, labored breathing was all that was heard. No one had the energy to speak. And any complaints were quickly adhered to with more weights. And yet, somehow that wasn't even the worst part. High knees, people. High knees. Tayang, get your skinny legs up to your chest and maybe you'll be able to get a smidgen off my aura just yet. Naruto goaded everyone with the same sickly warm smile that had covered his face the day before. He continued to shout encouragingly, cheering at the students with hardly a care for what they thought of him. And oh, they thought all sorts of hellish things for him. After all, he was laughing and talking and making jokes while doing the same workout as them, but with even more weights. When one of the students brought up that he might be using aura, Naruto disproved that theory immediately by syncing up his scroll to the arena's system. He also synced up everyone's scroll and called out the students that were using their aura furtively. They were punished with more of the instructor's abhorrent insults. "You absolute genius, you thought you were, huh? Well, lem tell you something, you aren't a genius until you can manage to paint the entirety of this beautiful Beacon campus a single solid shade of pink, Miss Felderwide." "Oh, Mr. Chadswick, I remember you were the one to ask me if I was too young to be a professor. Do I look too young to be a professor to you now? Well, do I? Do I? You didn't even challenge me yesterday, you brave soul. The 5 times 5 is 25 and 20 times 20 is 400, then what is 337 times 872? I'm talking to you, Mr. Gold." Silence. "Well, you wouldn't know either way without cheating, so I'm gonna tell it to you straight. It's 293,864. If you train like me, you would know that in an instant." And that was how it went for about another hour. Meanwhile, the students that had challenged their instructor were sitting in a meditative position, channeling their aura throughout their bodies in absolute peace. At least, that was the plan. Most of them couldn't ignore their professor acting like a sergeant in Atlas and choked on their laughter, breaking their focus. A few others simply stared wide-eyed. Raven chose to watch her brother curse a storm silently as he struggled through each set of exercises, sweating profusely. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "I hate that professor," Crow snarled, his teeth clenched in his displeasure. His entire body felt like it had been dragged across jagged rocks up a mountain and upon reaching his destination, had been tossed back and forth far too roughly. Essentially, "I'm so sore, but I'll gladly take a fight next time." Tayang let out a rueful chuckle, giving his teammate a sideway glance. "Sure, yeah. Take a fight against that guy. Sounds fun. I'll be glad to watch." He still felt like his parade had been rained on by a hurricane from the day before. At least he had 18 others that felt the same. Actually, Raven didn't count. She actually pushed the professor back the tiniest of margins in her last attack. Seriously, though, wasn't it so saddening that he was jealous that she managed to take out even 0.2%? Perspective really makes some things acceptable and other things ridiculous. Same here. I know that workout was rough, but that kick to the chin made me feel things I'd rather not. Workouts, I can at least recover with cookies. "I'll sit out, thanks," Summer said her piece with a sigh at the end, eyes closing from exhaustion. "I mean, that's fair," Crow acquiesced. Then, he pointed a finger at Tayang. "But you watch me, you little punk. And I'll at least get a solid hit in to make even with that jump." He shook his head roughly in agitation. "Who does he think he is? As hard as it is to believe, I believe I'm your professor." That cheerful voice was far too familiar to the group. Slowly, as four and in unison, the team united to turn in tandem. Before them was, indeed, their combat instructor. However, instead of the tracksuit sweatpants and warm-up jacket he had worn for past 2 days during class, the teen was now donning a buttoned semi-formal bright blue shirt, matched with beige khakis that was freshly pressed. Summer, Crow, and Tayang all blanked. "What's with the getup?" Raven inquired, starting the conversation. "We only finished class about 30 minutes ago." Naruto scratched the back of his head, chuckling. "Yeah, well, you guys the entire class seemed to take a long time changing into their school attire. It was actually long enough for me to change, go to my after-class meetings and finish up and head to my office hours." The team stood slack-jawed. Had they really spent that long? "Yeah, you guys really dragged your feet to the dorm hallways. I was able to catch up to you guys from around the corner after about a few seconds. Make sure to stretch more tonight so that you won't feel as sore tomorrow, alright?" Bleak nods were his response. "Oh right," Naruto continued, not at all perturbed by the rapidly paling faces of his students at the realization that this was their new norm. "I know that you guys are tired, but how about you guys come to my office hours? I have to meet up with some second years to answer a few questions, but after that I'm open to all classes. It'll be a great learning experience." "I'm good, Prof," Tayang muttered under his breath. Summer nodded immediately in agreement. "I have cookies waiting for me back in the room, so I have to tend to that. It's like super important." She excused herself and walked with dragging feet as fast as she could back to her dorm, leaving behind her teammates. "It's for the greater good." Pro eyed the glorious and brave team leader, fleeing with all the cowardice in the world with understanding. "I'm fine. Thanks, but no thanks. I have to help our leader with some cookies, real important," as she said. "Besides, does anyone even go to your office hours?" He didn't wait for an answer and began to walk away. Tayang followed after him, saying that he was the one that was to help Summer with her cookies. The two tripped over a ridge of carpet that suddenly spiked up, leaving the two growling on the ground and Crow grumbling, "Just my luck," as he got up. Which left Raven and Naruto standing isolated in the hall. Raven pinched the bridge of her nose, eyes closed in irritation. "I apologize on my brother's behalf. We came to Beacon to become as strong as possible, and he's running away to eat cookies with the leader of the team." Naruto shook his head. "It's fine. It's nice to see that your team is doing so well together. Although Crow should probably drop the act and try to actually connect with others." Raven stilled. Before they came, they were told that in order to fit in at Beacon, they had to learn anything. That included how people interacted with others and got on others' good sides. They had trained to attain the goodwill of others, and they had thought they had that art down to the very last trick. It had taken them months of practicing, painstakingly learning how to read people and use the proper vernacular. Which also meant they had to learn vocabulary. It was horrid. And yet, this single instructor saw straight through that and called out her brother without a single hesitation. Does this mean the other instructors would have noticed? "What makes you say that?" Raven asked, her eyes narrowed at the slightly shorter professor. Naruto looked onto where the boys had fallen to the ground and smiled softly. "Because I was like that once. Trying to understand others without really understanding them. The best way to actually get to know others and how to get in others' skin is to know the other person beyond their facets and skin level aspects. Their schedule, their habits, their favorite food, these are all things you can learn in a day. Their fears, their likes, their loves, things you can learn in a week. What you learn from years of camaraderie is only possible if you truly open up yourself to the other. Otherwise, there's always something missing." He turned his gaze to her. She felt a lump in her throat. "That means you, too. Miss Branwen, I would suggest that you, also, learn to lower your walls. Is your semblance understanding others?" she asked sarcastically, trying to deflect the conversation. Naruto kept his easygoing smile, catching the shift she wanted in the conversation. He started walking, and Raven followed beside him. "You could say that." Her pupils came into full view. "If I didn't tell people what my semblance was, I believe many others would be confused. But since your random guess was actually somewhat on the right track, I'll correct you and give you a better hint. My ability has more to do with understanding in general, and this goes beyond people. It took me a long time to actually realize how to use it because I took it the wrong way initially and believed I was not suited for combat." Raven stared hard at her professor. "You, Professor Uzumaki. Just Naruto, please. I don't like the formalities. Not suited for combat. That's a bad joke and I believe I'm rather poor in telling those." They turned a corner. Naruto pulled out his scroll and flicked through a few applications. "I think I'm a rather good comedian. Check this, my pupil. Knock knock. Who's there?" Raven aloud. "I eat mop. I eat mapu," she replied in confusion. Naruto's grin stretched and reached his eyes. "Ruos." She paused in her steps, realizing what she had just said. Raven glared at her combat instructor with malice. "You're not very mature, are you?" He shrugged to her dig at his character. "I'm only 16. What do you expect? At least I won't stick my tongue at you." He put his scroll away. "But I did record that whole time, miss. I eat my poo. Now, if you'd excuse me, I have to go talk to some students." Naruto knocked on the door to one of the students' rooms just a few steps away. He was allowed entry and went inside a moment later. The black-haired girl stood stock still for a minute longer, replaying that entire conversation. "Perhaps that's his way to telling me I need to focus on my surroundings more." She brought a knuckle to her chin as she pondered in the middle of the spacious hallway. It is possible her eyes shone. "But I'll make sure to get him back." Before anything else, though, she needed to get her body back to her dorm. When she entered her own spacious room, she was greeted by the scent of sweets permeating throughout her living quarters. The space had enough room to have 4 beds for sleeping, 4 desks for studying, 4 individual closets, and a large bathroom, and some extra space that they hadn't even really taken advantage of because the rooms were simply too large. And yet, the smell was so strong that she crinkled her nose immediately upon entry. Spotting the origin of the stench, she spotted Summer dunking a cookie into a cup of milk and quickly shoving it whole into her mouth. Beside her team leader was a gigantic pile of cookies, no doubt stolen from the kitchen. The shameless girl glanced in her direction, waved cheerfully, and went straight back to her desserts unabashed. "The kid hold you up?" Crow spoke from his position against one of the walls. "Did he take notice of you or something?" Raven shook her head. "More like he took notice of you," she answered easily. Her brother slipped on a look of disbelief. "He noticed a crack in our training and he called you out for it." Crow openly cursed, no longer in the presence of their taskmaster. "Did he call me weak? Seriously, I'm gonna punch that kid." Before she could correct him. "Good luck with that. I'll make sure to record every single fight," Tayang called out from his spot on the bed. He had no reluctance to sit on his bed as he was not sweaty. He appreciated not having to do the workout today, but he seriously questioned the importance of meditation. Crow grinned with venom. Good, I hope you do. One of these days, I'm gonna get that little hellion, he swore to whatever gods existed. None of them heeded him. Mukanu et. A mouth stuffed full of cookies. Summer Rose cheered, a single fist raised in the air. Right, Raven let out. In the end, she decided to let the misunderstanding remain and move on to another subject. She could always tell him later that what the professor meant was that they both needed work on their conversational and infiltration skills in general. Are we doing anything today? I don't want to crash out like yesterday and do nothing. It feels counterproductive and would rather prefer it were not a habit. Speak for yourself, Crow called out. Her rebuttal was that she was. He choked when she continued to explain that she had already studied up on the history of Remnant as suggested by their history professor and gone through a single chapter in every subject last night before going to the cafeteria to refuel on protein and carbs. Alright, sis. I get it. Get off my case. He huffed out and turned his head away, unwilling to look at her. The rest of the team quietly gave their lack of plans to do anything for the rest of the evening other than go to the cafeteria to eat and to study a bit. Nodding, Raven decided that there was no incentive for her to stay with her team. Perhaps it is best for me to learn the layout of the campus. I may join you all for dinner. Message me whenever you plan to eat. And she went out of the room. The three of them stared at the door as it naturally began to close. When it finally shut, Summer and Tayang peered over to their last teammate. Is she really your sister? Tayang asked, incredulousness clear. Summer nodded her head rapidly. Crow pulled down on his eyelids with his fingers, rubbing his palm against his cheeks. Yeah, she's my sister, alright. It's always been like this. He breathed out melodramatically, earning a scoff from the other dude and a giggle from Summer. I just wanted to relax and have a good time here, but she wants me to work hard. Oh, the absolute horror. Indeed. The horror. Raven made good time exploring the campus, seeing for herself what the images on her phone could not describe. The library was gargantuan. The ceiling was so high up and the shelves were only slightly shorter than the ceiling itself. Each bookshelf was packed with knowledge and she walked through each aisle to familiarize herself with the subjects offered by the school. Indeed, there was no lack of information in this academy. Topics on the origin of aura, how aura is trained and practiced, and how it is used in present life, and the implications of its usage including in war and politics, were all right there at the tips of her fingers. The history of Remnant, the supposed birth of Grimm and how the ancient civilizations fended off the violent creatures of the darkness, and how both man, Grimm, and faunus all evolved to each with the threat of the other party. In another aisle, there were novels with excessive prose and pompous novels, simply for the sake of having a book written and somehow published. At least, that's how she saw some of them. She exited the aisles, sure that there were at least 100,000 sources for her to read whenever she wanted, and walked by the long tables used for studying in the central area of the library. She had already visited the fountain and had seen the cliffs at Beacon due to the initiation test. There were a few other locations she did want to quickly glimpse, but the majority of her to-do list was complete. Perhaps she would walk to one of the edges of the campus and take a breather and read a book there. She had rented out one of the books on aura and semblances as she was curious as to what civilizations thought of them. She had a general idea from her own experiences and her tribe had told her what aura and semblances were capable of, but this was all about perspective. The school had thousands of books and the world had thousands of researchers. She was sure to find interesting theories. So she had picked out a random book. She spotted a nice tree with shade with grass surrounding the area that would suffice for her reading pastime. However, she groaned at the sight of a certain blonde with about 6 students all around the area of the tree. It seems that she wouldn't get her time here, so she turned to walk away. Raven, you came to my office hours. I'm surprised to see you make it after only your second day here, Naruto called out to her, spotting her instantly. She sighed and faced her combat instructor, noting that he had changed yet again into a blue tracksuit with white stripes. He was standing in the middle of a clearing of grass, a scroll in his hands. He waved her over before looking down at his device and calling out 2 of the students that were sparring near him. 2 males were fighting with their weapons out, moving with such ease that she had no doubt that both were well versed with their weapons. It was as if the blade at the edges of each hand were simply an extension of the body. She walked over, making sure not to interfere with the high-level spar that was taking place. Next to Naruto was a young adult woman about her height. Blonde with curls at the end that reached her shoulder blades, glasses at the tip of her refined nose with sharp green eyes behind the lens. A casual white top that hugged the frame of her body with moderately sized breasts and black leggings that did little to cover her toned legs. Raven, she introduced herself to the girl, her arms crossed. The other girl simply glanced in her direction before returning her focus to the fight. Glenda. The older student nudged her glasses. A pleasure. The blonde student noticed the book in Raven's hand. Her eyes glinted with veiled excitement. I see you also partake in research. Raven looked down at the book in her right hand and shook her head, her hair swaying. Nothing like that. I was simply interested in what Beacon had to offer when it came to knowledge of aura and semblances. Oh, do tell, Glenda said. If anything, Raven thought the girl sounded more interested. It's rare to have talks about the nature of aura and semblances. Normally, most of my peers are satisfied with knowing that they have aura and what their semblance does, but nothing so grand as why we have our specific semblances and why certain individuals have extraordinary levels of aura, like Professor Uzumaki here. For example, isn't it strange that some parents have never had their aura unlocked but have a child that has high levels of aura? It's Naruto, Glenda, Naruto interjected, but his eyes were still focused on the two students that were dashing about the clearing. The other three students were as transfixed as the blonde, their attention almost trance-like as they gazed upon the dance occurring before them. I've told you this 100 times. You're also older than I am. And as I've said 100 times as well, Professor. You are in higher standing and have earned your position as professor at this academy. It would do you well to accept that a bit of self-respect and proper disposition would bring about more respect from your students, Glenda reasoned, firm on her opinion. Naruto simply sighed. You're the only one that really feels that way. Besides, I think I have enough self-respect and I don't need the respect of students, Naruto said. Why not? Raven asked, her fingers tightening around her arms. Respect was fought for and an unquestionable boon in the society she grew up in. It didn't matter if an individual had no self-respect, but if they were strong, they were still feared. And fear meant that there was a modicum of respect in that feeling. And she wanted to be respected by her tribe and feared by her enemies. Good question. Naruto then walked towards the two boys that had finished sparring and gave them tips, exhilarated at the improvement he had seen. The two older students brightened up, despite panting heavily, at the praise. Linda seemed exasperated. This professor here is of the opinion that students at Beacon have a rather high self-esteem and outlook of self. Which he also admits is a good thing, but he also believes that there is a difference between self-confidence that matches the skill level of whatever student accurately and hubris of the highest order. In his opinion, and I am partial to his theory, most students fall into the latter category. I admit that Beacon is a prestigious academy and that only the best of the best students manage to enter the gates of this school as actual students. This gets into the thick skulls of most of my peers and they deem themselves far into the path of becoming huntsmen. Only 4 years here at Beacon and you graduate and attain a license to become huntsmen and are immediately respected by the majority of the civilized world. Your lineage and your progeny are immediately capable of having pedigree. Some students here are from privileged backgrounds. So they look at Naruto as a black sheep of sorts. For one, he's young. He never went to school and he also doesn't have a family history that matches his current status as professor. They envy him and ignore him, looking at him as if he were simply another student. Some don't even allow him that. But he's strong, Raven stated. There's no reason not to listen to him when it comes to fighting. Glenda turned her head to stare at Raven straight in the eyes. Red matched green and all was frozen in place. Then you'd be one of the few students that can say that they have a brain and actually uses it. She let the word sink in with a moment of silence. The history of remnant, the theories on aura and semblances, the science of dust and its uses, and the rest of the classes we take all fall short when it comes to combat. Anyone could be smart, but they have to be strong enough to become a huntsman, and to become a good huntsman is to understand what is necessary out of one and acting on it. Anyone that doesn't understand doesn't belong here, and the others that do not act upon the code of a huntsman are not ideal. Naruto was almost done conversing with two boys. He had called out two other students, one boy and girl, and was about to spectate them. He took a step in the direction of the last student and began to talk to him while keeping his eyes on the two girls about to spar. Plenty of students acknowledge that he's strong. But they refuse to overcome the hurdle that is their pride. They won't allow themselves to listen to someone younger than they, and the youngest professor at Beacon at that. Raven shook her head. Fools. Strength was everything. Absolute smooth-brained monkeys, Glenda agreed. Protocol and hierarchy was necessary. The two girls turned to face the newly started spar when Naruto gave the signal to begin. Once again, it was a high-level battle with unexpected moves that could only be thought of on the spot if one had experience or was suggested the idea. Or if they were a genius. That was always a possibility, Raven allowed. She shook her head. But why are you telling me all of this? We just met. Because you walked back when he called for you. Because all of the other students choose to walk away instead or sheepishly deny his beckoning. Raven stared at the blonde professor who had a wide grin on his face as he scribbled down notes on his scroll while analyzing the fight at the same time. The eagerness and unbridled pride he showed had no falsehood. It was why each of these students, definitely all older than first years as she didn't recognize a single face, trusted him and listened to him. He understood combat and knew how to teach it, and they accepted that as fact and chose to listen. Even if it was only 6 of them here. But he taught first years, and she realized that he probably was given the option to teach the older, more mature students. Did he deny the option to teach the upperclassmen? She finally asked after mulling over that sobering thought. Glenda nodded. I can't say I don't understand, but I don't approve. If only 5 fourth-year students and 1 third-year student are willing to come to his office hours, how does it make sense that first-year students would listen to him? He was here for the last semester last year, and he had office hours every day. We were the only 6 to come, and still are. Their theory came to fruition. He was selfless, a quality she had heard of and read about, but could not understand. He had given up the potential to work with older students that would be more accepting of a younger professor, ironic as that sounded, and had chosen to take the more difficult approach to teach the youngest students at the academy. But why? Weren't there better instructors available, or at least ones that would capture the attention of the students from the first day and forever hold on to the respect of the students until the end when they graduate? Maybe even after. She had no answer to her added questions. Answers only seemed to result in more questions. However, if anything, she could understand one thing. Naruto was doing what he could, and Glenda was doing what she could to help him and tell him that she trusted him. And so were the other 5 students. So the least she could do is. I'm Raven Branwyn, first-year student, Raven said, reintroducing herself. For the first time in that conversation, Glenda softened her expression and allowed herself a smile that made her beautiful in the afterglow of the sunset that lightly touched the campus. Glenda Goodwitch, 4th-year student. They stood in silence, watching the spar continue until its end. They continued to watch as Naruto cheered up the 2 girls when they walked over to him with sullen expressions, both displeased with their performance. Their eyes never left the spectacle that was the first-year combat instructor taking on more responsibility than was necessary as he completely broke down the fight with a recording, complimenting and critiquing each moment with avid dedication and contagious excitement. By the end of it all, it seemed that the girls were content with their spar and, if anything, prepared to improve for the next time that they'd spar. Raven. Glenda. In a blur, Naruto was in front of the 2. Would you 2 like to join me in meditation? The rest of the students are going to stretch and warm down their bodies, and Rex, he thumbed over to the one student that hadn't fought in a spar, who was on his scroll and staring intently at whatever was on the screen. He's going to be breaking down the fights and work on his own stuff. Glenda donned her normal cool expression that betrayed none of her thoughts. Of course, Professor Uzumaki. We sparred yesterday, so it's only natural to allow our bodies to rest. Please, just call me Naruto, he sighed, already knowing what she was going to say. Glenda simply gave him a look and sat down cross-legged, already closing her eyes. He looked at Raven. She couldn't help but notice that despite what he said earlier about not needing the respect of students, that didn't mean that he didn't necessarily crave it. He was looking at her with professionally veiled expectant hope. It was masked so well, but there were minute tells that gave her the impression that he actually wanted her to stay. To learn. To become the best huntsman she could be. It's not as if she wasn't tempted to stay. But I'm going to be the leader of my tribe, not as a huntsman. She shook her head. I'm sorry, Professor. I have to join my teammates for dinner and rest my body for tomorrow's classes. I doubt you'll go easy on the students that meditated today. She forced herself to ignore the hope that slowly wilted away in his eyes. But the understanding and goodwill never left his expression. Of course. Go mingle with your teammates and prepare for tomorrow. I'll have you know that I got something special for the 20 of you that chose to fight me. He then shooed her away. Taking the hint, she turned and walked back in the direction of the dorms with her book open and reading as she went. She sincerely did not look forward to tomorrow. Back with Naruto, he had yet to sit down or close his eyes. You didn't have to say all of that to her, Naruto told Glenda, whose eyes were closed in meditative concentration. She can make her own assumptions and realizations. Glenda opened her eyes and looked up to her professor. He had his arms crossed, a rare look of contemplation without a trace of his smile visible. She has a good head on her shoulders. Naruto shook his head, smile still in place as he gazed at where Raven had turned the corner. If so, then she would have come to the same realization that you came to. That Rex, Sylvia, Amy, Max, and Curtis have come to. She needs to come to recognize the flaws that our huntsman society has and what is necessary to remove the pride that infects almost every huntsman. Pride is not necessary on a battlefield. I just gave her a little push in the right direction. Naruto deadpanned. Yes, he spoke without inflection. If you mean a little push in Glenda Goodwitch terms, that's the equivalent of strong-arming someone and then forcing them onto a bullhead to fast-track them to the destination without their consent. He sat down next to her and sighed. Just let them make their own decisions. Yes, Professor. She closed her eyes. "You really work too hard sometimes, Professor," she told him fondly. She had known him for only 6 short months, but it was enough to make her own realization that Naruto truly wanted the best for his students. He wanted each one to succeed and become exemplary huntsmen and people. It wasn't enough for him to simply teach someone how to fight, but to also become a great person. She found that aspect of him endearing and something that most people didn't have. Something special. "It's not that I work too hard. It's that everyone else doesn't take this line of work seriously enough," he rebutted. Glenda chose to remain silent, affirming in her mind that her young professor was truly an exceptional person. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Huntsmen died. That was a simple fact. They died from missions, from unexpected conditions, from assassinations, to an infinite number of other potential possibilities. It simply came with the line of work. Death was a fact in life, and early deaths were a statistic that could not be ignored for huntsmen. So he made sure that when he trained his students, that they would be strong. The fact that the last batch of students to graduate from Beacon were stronger than the previous year's newly minted huntsman only proved his dedication to his craft as well as his proficiency as a professor. But it wasn't enough. 3 of his students already died since graduation. They had never come to his office hours. He had done all that he could in class, and he had tried to convince the 3rd and 4th years multiple times to come train with him after school. Every day. They hadn't. And 3 died. Hubris. Naruto held back a snarl, which would have no doubt broken the smile normally perennially present on his lips. What a disgusting fault. Chapter end. Chapter 3 start. I want to start this class with asking a question. I'm under the assumption that your history class has just covered the role of faunus in the history of remnant. That said, what characteristics do faunus have that are innately beneficial to them? Faunus. The discriminated race in society that never fit in with remnant's human society. From what she remembered of lecture the day before, it was uncertain whether faunus or mankind came first, but the annals of history at least, according to mankind's history, stated that human civilization came about first, and faunus followed afterwards. The ancient civilizations of human discovered a race of people that had animalistic traits. In every way, they looked human. Except for the singular animalistic trait each faunus had. Suddenly, the relationship between mankind and the world had been profoundly shifted. Faunus had been introduced into the mix, and as such, there was no choice but to accept the fact that there was a new race of people to consider for society and history. As unwelcome as they were, faunus were recognized by the general public. Over centuries, they were gradually meshed into mankind's populace, but not without significant pushback. In fact, discrimination still existed to this very day. There were some grassroots communities that were forming amongst the faunus to fight for their rights and to try to make mankind see them as equals. They're all animals. That's the common trend with them, one of the students spoke out with a dismissive tone. Raven didn't even deign to look over at the clearly racist student who had said the same answer during the history lecture and had earned himself additional homework for his eye-opening response. Instead, she preferred to watch Naruto's reaction to this answer. The professor paused mid-walk, his side to his class. He quickly turned his body so that he was now facing the class head-on and looked directly at the student that had spoken his opinion. "Mr. Glimstone. Please explain your position," Naruto spoke clearly. There was no change in tone or in disposition. The blonde combat instructor still had the same warm smile plastered on his face, and his eyes remained pools of oceans with short lapping waves that brought others comfort. And yet there was an uncomfortable shift in the air. Glimstone, unperturbed by the negativity suddenly spiking, decided to heed Naruto. Simple. They're animals that somehow integrated their way into a society that wants no part with them. They don't belong and should go back to where they came from. The few students began to shift in their seats due to a myriad of emotions. The students that openly showed their faunus traits betrayed looks of hostility or shame. A few others showed unease at the blatant show of discrimination. Perhaps there were also some other students that hid their faunus traits and felt additional shame from not only not standing up to this asshole, but also from not having enough pride in their ancestry to show their animalistic traits. "Incredible," Naruto finally said after a solid half-minute of silence. "Thank you, Professor. I'm glad to find that you agree with me when the history professor found my opinion so contradictory," was the self-satisfied, smug response. Glimstone even had the gall to cross his legs and smirk. Raven had to admit that perhaps Glenda had a point. Hearing about racism and seeing it happen right in front of you put the discrimination that had been occurring for centuries in a completely different perspective. She had thought that because students came to Beacon, where strength was touted as the most important characteristic, that students would either overlook or even not care about the fact students were faunus. An open campus where all were welcomed as potential huntsmen. She was clearly mistaken, and Glenda was correct. There might just be plenty of students with smooth brains. Naruto, she noticed, still maintained his disposition of dead calm when he spoke, his tone still so calm. I was hoping for a more enlightening discussion, but perhaps that's a bit too much to ask of you all in the second week of school. But something was different. The tension that could have been literally cut with a sheer knife was now something that was choking on many of the students. The professor walked to the edge of the arena and then jumped casually up to the bleachers, staring at all of the students. I suppose then that today's lesson will be slightly different. Monday, I taught you that I am indeed your professor and combat trainer. Do not forget that those are two different titles given to me. I have earned the right by Beacon's headmaster to become a combat instructor due to my potency in battle. I have also earned my right to be a professor in Beacon, so I find it my duty to teach you everything I know. He began to walk up the steps of the audience section, the sound of his feet echoing softly with assured confidence. On Tuesday, I made most of you train on your physical strength and the ones that challenged me to meditate. The first is obvious, but the latter is not so. Some of you may have come to a conclusion that I'm actually an idiot that doesn't know what I'm doing because you cannot figure out why I'm forcing students to sit down for a good 30 minutes instead of discussing with them other potential subjects. For example, I could have probably delved into combat theory, types of engagements, how to properly infiltrate, or even the concept of ceding and accepting defeat when you wish to lose the battle but win the war. But I chose to teach you all how to meditate and will continue to do so. After all, those concepts are things you learn with time and from other professors. He was now very close to the team leader that had spoken out in such a manner that had made his students bristle with anger, discomfort, fear, and shame. That was unacceptable. Wednesday, we simply switched the groups. And until today, the last day of this week, I've recycled the plans of Tuesday and Wednesday. I had plans for today to change things up, but perhaps a different sort of lesson would be acceptable, as it is equally conducive to learning as well as practicing combat. He was now directly behind Mr. Glimstone, who was attempting to maintain a brave front. It was clear to see that the first year thought highly of himself, hardly influenced by the fact that his professor was about to enact some kind of punishment. He wholeheartedly believed he was right and that it was his job to convince others that it was so. It was not to be. Mr. Glimstone, you have gratefully offered to be the first sparring partner of the day. Go to the arena. Glimstone haughtily gazed up at Naruto and found no shaking that ironclad will that bore down on him. Comprehending that arguing would earn him nothing, the boy stood and walked down the steps and jumped down to the arena floor. Once he was the sole individual that was standing at the arena, Naruto then spoke very clearly. Now pick a faunus to fight. Many of the students physically recoiled. Even Glimstone seemed shocked by the audacity of the order before glee overtook his expression. A sadistic eyes that had no belonging on the campus of Beacon Academy. With delight, the boy chose one of the thinner faunus who he noticed to be lacking on the physical strength department during the 2 training days. Said faunus student stood up, hesitation in his eyes, but dutifully walked forwards all the same. He was short in stature and thin in build. He had antlers that grew out of the top of his head, indicating clearly what type of animal he was. Once the two were standing on the arena, the static in the air became more than palpable and suffocating. Everyone was waiting in it, drowning in anticipation. Glimstone was staring at the faunus student, Maximilian Deer, with undisguised leers. He was excited to be able to release his mental irritation at his history professor as a physical beatdown on the student that was part of a worthless race. Everyone could see it. It was as clear as day. It was also crystal clear that Glimstone was no slouch by the point that he was one of the students that Naruto had forced to put on more weights in order for him to struggle equally with all of the other students. Summer was clutching her cape, bristling and hardly able to contain her voice. She was normally meek in large gatherings, but the injustice of the situation was simply too much for her to bear. She wanted so badly to yell out or even call out the professor, but the way Tayang and Crow looked at her, knowing that she would made her glare down at her hands in shame and hot anger. She furtively glanced at her last teammate. Raven doubted that Naruto would allow for this fight to happen as it was. It simply did not fit the bill of his character that she had seen in the past few encounters. However, perhaps she was wrong. It wouldn't be the first time, and she would take it as a lesson to make more accurate portrayals of characters in her minds, if that was what occurred. So she crossed her arms, her index finger tapping against a bicep. She had been taking this contemplative pose more often as of late due to the nature of learning, but Naruto had really been forcing her to take a different stance on many of her views. Perhaps this was simply another lesson. I want to stop this, Summer squeaked out, fear and anger combined. Before she could, Naruto's voice once again boomed. I am of the opinion that hearing and reading about things and seeing with my own 2 eyes are experiences of their own. It's one thing to hear about the combat prowess of a person, and it's a beauty to actually watch them fight. To hear about death is sad, but to see people that knew the dead attempting to cope with the fact that someone they loved is no longer here is heartbreaking. Every emotion you feel in a situation where you are a bystander far and away from the point of conflict or event can shock you, but not in the way being a part of or a direct viewer of the happening taking place can. The entire time, Naruto had that understanding smile on his face, as if he already knew that people were simply going to have conflicts and that there would be students like Glimstone. As if he believed that it was his job to teach them. That this was only a step to making a difference in the immediately world that he lived in and for the betterment of all the students and faculty at Beacon. So let's put this theory of mine into practice. This will be my lesson for the day. The lights all shut off so that the only light visible was from the screens on the top of the room that displayed the two students on the arena and their aura levels. It hardly gave off enough light, however, to enable most students to see their own fingers, unless they were a faunus. In the minds of many of the students, the lesson that Naruto wanted them to grasp clicked like a carabiner. It locked into place, steadfast and unflinching. "Wait, this isn't fair," Glimstone shouted in the darkness, his indignation clearer now that all the students could hear was his voice. "Neither is discrimination," was Naruto's cold, uncaring response. "Fight." For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Not that Raven, her team, or any of the students could see. Except for the faunus. The minority that could see watched as Maximilian tepidly sneaked up on Glimstone, assuring himself that the other student couldn't see. Glimstone seemed far too fearless in a situation like this, and Max's heart thumped harshly against his chest, his breath becoming heavy as a result. "I hear you, you animal. Come out, come out." Goaded the normal student, delirious from suspense. He would take the first hit and then counter immediately. He knew he couldn't see, but there was no way he was helpless in a situation like this. The fear in Max's eyes dwindled, however, at a certain realization. The student in front of him said he could hear him, but nothing of the sort when it came to seeing him. Emboldened, he made his first move, stepping around the student like a ghost. It was too fast for him to comprehend. 1 second, he was waiting in a combat stance, the prospect that the animal could attack from behind certainly a potential outcome. However, how was he supposed to react to it? The animal kicked the back of his knees, breaking his stance. Before he could respond or even return to form, he was struck again on the same spot with even more force than before, forcing him to buckle and drop to that knee. He swung his arm out horizontally in retaliation, twisting his upper body as he bellowed with his attack, but struck nothing. A searing pain in his cheek was the result of his actions, turning his neck. Another blow to the back of his head and then the small of his back as he began to fall. Anyone that understood combat would recognize the extremely dangerous situation that Glimstone had fallen into. He was prone, with his stomach flush against the ground. The hits were not necessarily devastating, but they were pinpoint accurate and struck with the goal of quickly finishing off an opponent. If this was in the real world, outside the safety of Beacon's gates and not done in a learning environment, perhaps this would have been where Glimstone met his end. "Enough," Naruto commanded. Max, however, moved as if he had never heard the words escape his professor's lips. As if years of bitterness of the unfair treatment had taken its toll and retribution would come through beating a down man. Many of the faunus expressed different levels of shock. Some leaned forward, others reeled back. Naruto had caught the wrist of the faunus that had attempted to strike a man while he was down in the pitch black. Their professor, who they were certain was human, had easily stopped the faunus exactly where he was and without a single hesitation in his movement. They watched with full attention as Max, breathing heavily, as if he were in a state of bloodlust, almost attempt to strike the professor. He had struggled for only a second, but it was plain as the darkness what his intent was. Like a flash, Max realized what he was about to do and released the fist. Naruto let the student go, and Max stumbled backwards, his feet now making sounds once again. "I am sorry. I don't know what happened," guilt saturating the apology. Naruto nodded, his blue orbs directly matching Max's own. "I understand, Mr. Deer. I really do understand you, but you cannot let that kind of emotion overtake you, or else it will be to the downfall of yourself and your race. There are consequences to actions." When Max nodded with the slightest margin, Naruto smiled and nodded in the direction of the seats. The faunus made his way out of the arena, leaving the other student and the professor alone on the ground. Glimstone, for once, was silent as he laid on the ground in his defeat. "Perhaps this is a good time to get up and go back to your seat, Mr. Glimstone. There are many second chances here at Beacon. After all, you will have 4 years to reflect on your mistakes, and I do hope you make many mistakes so that you can learn as much as possible during your stay here. This is a school, after all, and every teacher's goal is for the students to learn." Slowly, Glimstone picked himself up. Glum and defeated, the boy stood. Naruto turned on the lights. All of the students winced at the sudden shift as their brain and eyes adjusted. Glimstone walked off the arena and left his pride there. Silence. To most of the students who could not see anything, the only thing they could see was the aura levels on the board. Glimstone's aura was rapidly depleted. In simply a few seconds in the darkness, he was dropped to 70%. It was a terrifying prospect, suddenly, to realize how much aura they would have to project to defend themselves when they had no clue when someone would attack and with how much force. How much aura should they utilize and when? Or should they consistently create a layer of aura to coat themselves in a body shield, allowing their aura levels to trickle down as they waited? But then, the faunus could simply wait for them to exhaust themselves and overcommit to defense, only to fall all the same. Truly, hearing and seeing it was absolutely different. None of them wanted to experience what Glimstone had. On the other side, many of the faunus felt something that had not for so long when it had come to their race. Comfort. A single thread of hope as their professor utilized the trait that had allowed them to win multiple battles with unbeatable odds and come out victorious and had shown it in a one-on-one duel. A sense of comfort in one's skin and race. But also, there was slight confusion expressed by a few of the faunus who were whispering to each other. Was Naruto a faunus, then? How could he so clearly defend in the dark and know what each person was doing? Naruto walked forward toward the students and immediately caught their attention. He was smiling charismatically, hands on his hips. I'm sure many of you have discerned what today's lesson is. However, I will say it in words so that there will be no uncertainty. The faunus have an absolute advantage over everyone, Grim included, in the night. In darkness. Where you cannot see, they can. Even the worst of odds on their side can be overcome if a foolish general decides to fight in the darkness. This lesson does not need to be specifically focused only on the advantages of the faunus, but also to other situations. This is an applicable lesson. Take the advantages you can and utilize them, no questions asked, but be aware for contingencies. As for those that have a disadvantage, accept that you are at the side without the high ground and plan accordingly. Defend, run, save your lives to come fight another day. If you have times to be discriminatory, then you have time to improve yourself as a fighter so that you can protect yourself, so that you can stay alive and keep talking your talk at the very minimum. Improve, train, practice. Get stronger, smarter, faster. Make no excuses for yourself when you fail and learn from your mistakes so that you can use it as an experience. The battlefield is no place for regrets. So move forth in everything you do with all you have and that you live a long life without regrets. Naruto's grin widened and raised a fist into the air, like a beacon. And I'll help all of you become strong. Shivers ran down the spines. Chills and goosebumps broke out as the traces of awe came into reality. He was young, but well-spoken and mature. Eyes bright with blue that reflected a warm soul, yet full of experience that one should not have at a young age. Skilled in hand-to-hand to an unprecedented degree that he became the first professor at Beacon under the age of 20. None had even come close to his accomplishment in age. Moving forward, I want everyone to get in the arena. Everyone that's a faunus is going to be on one side and everyone else is going to be on the other side. Faunus, you have my permission this class to beat your classmates until submission. Bewilderment. Whatever awe that was present had dissipated and had been quickly replaced by shock at the audacity of the professor. Raven began to chuckle, a warm sensation that started from her chest that slowly bubbled up until it escaped her lips. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. In 5 minutes, he had shown how much more powerful faunus were at night and in the dark compared to a normal soldier or huntsman, even at a massive physical disadvantage. To think that Naruto could do a better job of explaining the benefits of having faunus allies and teammates in such a simple yet practical manner that the textbooks could not, even by showing how effective it was when a general decided to attack at night and losing despite the massive numerical advantage, only depicted how effective of a teacher Naruto was. He evoked emotions from his listeners. At least from her. He made her want to listen to him and to take his words beyond face value. Of course, you'd learn if you sat there listening dumbly to the words he said without thinking anything further, but she had come to realize that whenever he said things that he wanted you to hear, there were usually underlying reasons or possibly explanations that wouldn't be caught by scrutinizing the words with a blank stare. But all of it fell short of one thing that she caught. He was living his life without regrets. That shook her to her very core, ratting her very reason of existence. Once again, she was forced to sit there or laugh at how absurd the notion was. Because it was just too different. Selfless and yet unquestioning of his stance in life. Wanting nothing more for himself other than the success of his students. Was there truly nothing else this professor wanted in life? She came here to be strong. There was no more questions to ask. I'm game, professor. She shouted, uncrossing her arm and standing tall. She grinned fiercely and turned to face the rest of the class. Come at me, my faunus classmates. Show me how effective you are in darkness. The challenge brought forth feelings of rivalry. Not hatred or hostility, but a healthy symbiotic relationship of wanting to test the other. The way she said it, that ferocious grin that provoked everyone to dare test her, it made everyone, and not just the faunus, to measure up to her. After all, she was the student that had forced Naruto to burn even the slightest amount of aura, and she was still the only student to succeed in doing so. 2 weeks of training had resulted in everyone gaining a significant boost from their base strength that they had entered with, and it was easily noticeable by how much faster everyone ran when Naruto timed them for sprints with and without aura. Every student also hit harder, based on the physical displacement test he had introduced to the students, instructing them to hit a stationary object that would determine the amount of force a student could produce from their body. There was no doubt that Raven was becoming stronger and she relished in her improvements. But everyone else was also realizing their potentials as well, and they wanted to test their newfound prowess in spars against each other. The pent-up energy of 2 weeks was coming to an end now. All of the students walked down to the arena, and Naruto spread all of the students without faunus traits all about the room. Naruto placed Raven immediately in the center, in the middle arena. She gave him a shit-eating grin, and he matched her with a smile that reached his eyes with an emotion called pride that made her wonder. Had the elders in her camp ever looked at her that way? "Good luck," he said silently, clapping her shoulder and moving past to place another student. Eyes narrowed with brimming determination, she told him, "I won't need it." All of the faunus were finally done being placed by Naruto, and every single one of their eyes were on her. "Come at me. Come. 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 Come at me." The lights shut off, and it was pandemonium with the groans of students echoing throughout the room almost immediately. Naruto chuckled in the dark to himself. They'd learn to at least run away in the future or maybe even team up in the darkness. And it's not like he ever said that they couldn't use their scroll for minimal lighting or not use aura and semblances. They'd learn, though. He'd make sure of that. Raven was beyond thankful that it was Friday. She wasn't sure if she could take another day of combat class like that. After inviting everyone to come at her with eager energy, the students had done so and absolutely shown her how incapable she was in the dark compared to them. But she had been a good enough sport about the whole situation, and the faunus had surrounded her and helped her up after it was all over, chatting with her. "You're alright, you know that. Other than that giant ego you got since you managed to get a graze on the professor, alright, that was the first day of class." She wasn't aware that she had come off that way to her peers, but perhaps it was a good thing she knew that now. And besides, it seems that the misunderstanding had been cleared as a result of the class. She had noticed that, however, due to the faunus approaching her with more openness, some of the other students had also created more space between her and themselves as a result. Screw them. She didn't need those kinds of acquaintances, anyway. Raven rubbed her left shoulder, then her right cheek. Those were two especially sore spots that seriously stung even with her aura protecting her throughout the fight. And when her aura had run out or when she tried to save aura, she was immediately punished harshly by kicks and punches. "Rough time?" Crow asked sitting next to her. The team had decided that they would go straight to the cafeteria to eat. She was the first to finish plating her food and had found a spot and was now waiting on the others to join her. Seared steak cooked to medium rare perfection with a salad on the side, freshly picked mushrooms served with sauce, and tossed salad with lettuce, tomatoes, plum, sliced carrots and sweet onions, and a selection of sauces to finish the dish. It was so tantalizing, but she was waiting for Tayang and Summer to hurry up and sit with them so she could start eating. "Something like that," she muttered. Crow shook his head in amusement and chuckled, slapping down on his right knee multiple times. "You should have seen the look on your face, sis. The way you called out the entire class." "It was just the faunus," she corrected. "It was ignored. And how badly they wanted to get at you. Man, I'm surprised this is all you've got to show for it. Only a bruised cheek." "Lucky you," he complimented. Raven rolled her eyes. "I don't need luck. At least not yours, anyway." Crow winced, but took it in stride. It's not as if they hadn't joked about each other's abilities beforehand. It was just a sensitive topic for him. "Besides, my left shoulder is pretty shot at the moment, too. Probably need the weekend to rest completely. Maybe I'll take a trip to the city. I finished all of my assignments until next Wednesday, anyway." "Oh, I want to go to the city." Summer vocalized excitedly. She sat down, and Tayang followed soon after. Raven looked at their plates and winced immediately. Tayang's plate actually wasn't too terrible. A hamburger with vegetables on the side and loads of fries. At least he chose to drink water. Summer's plate, on the other hand, made her proud to say that she only winced and had not recoiled. Cookies on 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 cookies. "We should do a team trip. It'll be fun." "Yeah," Raven said weakly, eyeing the rapidly shrinking pile with morbid fascination as her team leader ravenously gulped down concentrated amounts of chocolate and sugar and flour mouthful by mouthful. "That's insane." "I know, right?" Crow said, equally fascinated. However, he was more amazed than disgusted. "I wish I could eat my food like that. It might come in handy one day when we're on a mission." Tayang pointed a fork at him. Why did he need a fork for a hamburger, and said, that's a great point. Maybe we should see if there's a food eating contest at Vale tomorrow and practice how quickly we can scarf down food. Maybe one day, we'll be as impressive as our great leader. This time, both siblings recoiled in horror as Tayang grabbed a fork and knife, then cut it into quarters and ate it without using his hands. I don't know what to say, Crow murmured. Are you really a human, Tayang? He asked with eyes slit. This was a grave defect that they could simply not ignore. Tayang, to his wondrous ignorance, raised his eyes and eyebrows as he brought another piece of the sliced burger into his mouth. Of course I'm a human, what do you mean? I mean, the younger Branwen twin started, hoping that the weightiness of the situation would reach the oblivious Tayang. What kind of monster eats their burger without their hands? By the end of the question, Crow had raised both of his hands to eye level and half closed them, emphasizing his fingers by squeezing the air multiple times. Summer laughed while eating her cookies. Raven ignored her and decided to not give the girl any attention. Second-hand diabetes might just become a thing with this girl. Tayang nearly spit out his food. He managed to choke on it for a bit instead and then forced it down with some water. What are you talking about? Plenty of people eat their burgers with forks and knives. It's civilized. It's civilized. Crow started to cackle. Oh, that's rich, and that's coming from me. You see, believe or not, almost everyone eats burgers with their hands like normal people. But you eat yours like an animal with your fork and knife. He shoved a finger right in front of Tayang so that the other teen's eyes crossed. You disgust me, you traitor to humanity. But wah. Raven decided to step in here to end the stupid discussion. Crow, I'm sure that Professor Uzumaki would be displeased, so see you so blatantly discriminate against our own teammate in such a fashion for such a minor offense, especially after his lesson today. Her point made, she then began to tend to her own dinner, cutting into her steak. Crow and Tayang looked at her, unimpressed and stupefied respectively. I'm pretty sure that's not what he meant. It's a minor offense. The two boys proceeded to argue again, and their team leader was lost in her world of cookies. Stop. You've violated the law. How am I violating the law? The stupid discussion never ended, even when the team had entered their dorm after showering, and even when Raven asked them to shut the hell up when she tried to stretch and meditate in peace. Nothing productive happened for the rest of the night. Luckily, it was a Friday. Saturday morning had long passed and it was already closer to noon than they would have liked to admit. After waking up at 7 for the past 5 days, waking up at 11 felt wrong. Sure, they hadn't set an alarm and were sore from the week, but this was pushing it. By the time they were all dressed in their casual outing clothes and choosing a bullhead to ride to the city on, it was noon. Come on, let's go. I want to find some cool clothes and maybe some ammunition for my baby. Summer said, trying to hurry the team. Weren't you the last one up? Tayang brought up, completely aware of what he was doing as the girl shrunk into herself. It wasn't my fault. She reasoned, poking her index fingers together and looking at everywhere but her teammates. Tayang seemed nonplussed. Of course not. He sighed and then breathed in deep with his eyes closed. When they reopened, a cheerful persona replaced his prior unimpressed look. Don't worry about it. We still got at least half a day to check out the city, and it's not like we had a set time to go to the city anyway. Summer seemed to brighten up at the positive attitude that was practically beaming from the blonde and gave him a huge smile. Yeah, you're right. We never planned a time. That wasn't the point, Summer. Both of the Branwens thought in unison. Some bickering behind them broke them out of their thoughts. The four of them found themselves looking at their professor for combat, walking towards the bullhead dock with Glenda talking to him rapidly. Well, talking was putting it lightly. You caused a student to break their scroll, and you have to buy them a new one. She nearly yelled, tapping down the damages onto her own scroll to calculate the costs. Naruto winced. Yeah, but it was more like 17 students. You did what? Glenda couldn't hold herself back anymore as she shouted, a stray hair breaking away from her otherwise perfectly taken care of look. So you were the cause of 17 broken scrolls, multiple students visiting the infirmary, and parents even wanting to take away funding to Beacon Academy because of the stunt you pulled yesterday. Is that about right? Look at me, Professor. I really don't want to, Glenda. Professor. That voice was sickly sweet. Naruto rigidly turned to face his impending doom, his neck creaking like a robot as his eyes refused to meet hers. Professor, if you don't tell it to me straight, I'll stop helping you with your logistical work. It was me. I did it. I'm the culprit. Naruto let out passionately. Please, Glenda, you can't do this to me. I hate logistics. It's so dumb and… Professor Uzumaki, it would do you well to remember that I'm the one that does your logistics and enjoys that kind of work. And it's amazing how fantastic you are at getting to the bottom of things and making me see numbers so clearly. Wow, numbers. Amazing. 10 out of 10, can't confirm. Glenda looked at her professor. Extraordinary in all aspects but one. Logistics. He hated perhaps even that is stating it too lightly. Despised. She nodded her head. Naruto loathed any kind of work that even remotely looked like paperwork. Sure, he'd go to meetings with professors with a smile on his face. But the moment anyone mentioned paperwork, that smile quickly became strained. There was a rumor amongst the teachers that once, when someone brought up paperwork, a look of dread overcame the blonde professor, as if past memories had welled up inside of him and ghosts haunted him whispering about the terrors of paperwork. The rumor was obviously exaggerated beyond belief, but it was true that he was once reduced to a catatonic state due to an overload of staring at papers. His workload was significantly reduced ever since Glenda took pity on him. She sighed again before fixing her glasses on her nose. You owe the school at least a couple thousand lien and an apology to the board and the school's funders. Yes, it will be done. He replied immediately, a smile already on his face, knowing that Glenda would still help with his work. Good. Now, we have 3 minutes until Bullhead 3 leaves. Let's find a decent seat. Yes ma'am. The four of Team STRQ watched the entire situation play out before them. Naruto, the professor of Beacon Academy in combat, was reduced to a stuttering mess before Glenda. Raven's impression of the blonde fourth year shot up drastically. The other three, who had never met the girl, unconsciously considered her first impression as absolutely top class. Uncontested. Anyone that could bring down the professor, who was usually so meticulous and controlled, cheerful and smiling, was a game changer. That, and she was beautiful. Wow, who's that? Summer pointed at the older woman with both fingers, looking at her team for any answer. Linda Goodwitch. Raven nodded at said older student when the two met eyes. The pair of student and professor switched directions and began to walk towards them. I'm sure that she'll introduce herself in more detail, however. Tayang's eyes lit up. Wow, you know her, Raven. His expression turned sly and he whispered, maybe you can hook me up. He started to wriggle his eyebrows. The black-haired sword user rolled her eyes and pushed Tayang away as he leaned closer to her. You can do your dirty work yourself, you lawbreaker. Why do you keep on saying that? There's no law about eating burgers with forks and knives. I even looked it up. There's nothing in any article condemning my actions. Tayang complained, mood swinging like a capricious yet acceptable idiot. Because it's against cultural rules, dumbus. Even I know that, Crow said, poking the lawbreaker on the side. Look sharp, our kid professor is coming. Naruto had finally noticed them after looking up from his scroll. His smile immediately widened, whatever had happened with Glenda just a minute ago was left back there. Naruto seemed completely unfazed and had quickly returned back to his normal state. Good afternoon, Crow, Raven, Summer, Lawbreaker. How are you all today? Tayang couldn't take it anymore. He wobbled on his feet and fell onto Summer's shoulder, face covered over by his arms. To hear his professor say that as well, even in front of the girl that he had found so attractive, his feeble heart just couldn't take it anymore. It just can't be true. There's no way. They're discriminating against me. That's what it is. Yeah, he mumbled, words garbled by the shoulder he spoke into. Summer awkwardly waved to Naruto and tried her best to greet the taller blonde woman, but she found the task extremely daunting with the embarrassing situation at hand. She began to shrink into herself again, unsure of what to say. I'm Glenda, one of the fourth-year students at Beacon Academy. A pleasure to make your acquaintances, Team STRQ. She nodded at them all. In a flash, Tayang was off his leader's shoulder and standing with a straight back. She knew the team. Maybe he had a chance. He had to try to impress her. After all, who wouldn't want a hot tie dressed in a nice black button-up with white buttons that perfectly showed off the curves of a woman? And those thighs in those black leggings and purple skirt. Those mile-long legs that were toned with beautiful, perfect muscles. He could only imagine how fit she was and looked in other clothing. He wanted to kiss his fingers at the divine fashion taste by the gods. She was a professional tease. She had to be. I'm Tayang, first-year student, he greeted with the smoothest, best suave intonation he could muster after getting brutally manhandled by the Branwen's words. Glenda Goodwitch looked at him. How are you, Raven? And then she went straight to the first year that she knew from a previous encounter. Tayang fell hopelessly back onto Summer's shoulders, tears threatening to escape now, as Summer did her best to comfort him with we can have cookies later. I hope this professor has not been too harsh on you. Raven shook her head. No, he's been training us well. Just yesterday, he put me in the center of the arena and let all of the faunus first years attack me in the dark for the lesson of the day. Glenda whirled on Naruto. Naruto quickly shifted his gaze to Raven with a grin, his eyes clearly panicked. Yeah. She even got a bruised cheek and shoulder from it, Crow explained further, taking extensive pleasure from watching the shorter blonde writhe under the older woman's hard stare. Naruto was like a plant that was quickly wilting under the fiery gaze of an unrelenting sun. In a desert. With no soil. Dying. But she felt bad about the other students going to the infirmary, so she never got checked out. That's not how it happened. Naruto tried to explain, looking at the two Branwen twins. They met his eyes and then smirked as one. Glenda, who would have known that this was a prank had she been looking at the two, would have let Naruto off the case after realizing that he truly had not done something so brazen. In fact, normally, she would have taken those words at face value and thrown them in the trash. However, after what she had heard this morning about the damages he had caused and the repercussions of his lesson, her emotional state was slightly off-kilter. Hearing additional consequences to an event that had already taken place with its consequences confirmed by the professor made her believe the results at face value. I would never do that without carefully considering what could happen. She spent another couple of seconds staring hard at the professor who refused to look her way and was instead helplessly eyeing his students. She breathed out, suddenly tired of the situation and wanting to head to Vale immediately to get her mind off of this all. "We will have words, Professor. Later." Glenda stopped towering over Naruto in her heels and recompassed herself. "Now, I believe the bullhead will be departing soon. We should take our seats." Having said her piece, she walked away and into the flying aircraft. The five of them stood stock still as they watched her leave. Tayang whistled, one eye visible over his arms. "Wow, she has an ass." Summer gagged and dropped her shoulder to release the support she offered. Tayang recovered himself easily enough and kept watching the hips move rather sexily. Naruto turned to the team. Raven and Crow now looked away, suddenly realizing that Glenda was not here to save them. Nor was she here to hear anything he had to say. The blonde smiled, his eyes crinkling upwards as he walked regularly, menacingly, towards the twins. "Oi oi oi oi, was that your idea of a prank? That's pretty good, you two. I'm fairly impressed that you managed to do that so seamlessly, considering neither of you had that planned." He leaned in towards them and they craned their necks up and looked up at the sky. "I know I'm not that tall, so it's quite clear that you two aren't meeting my eyes. Why is that, Well, it's all fine, because I forgive you, Dadabeo. I really do. After all, I'm a professor. And a professor wouldn't make their students' training regimen more difficult due to personal reasons, now would they? That's just not what a good professor does, no sir. Somehow, everyone knew that there was some loophole coming in. However, if it threatens my workload as well as how much paperwork I have to do, that is not so personal and it suddenly becomes work-related. And funnily enough, my work is related to WoW, could you imagine that teaching at Beacon? And a combat professor at that. Even better is that. You are both students in my class, how incredible." Raven and Crow began to shake, sweat pouring down their foreheads. The river of sweat in the unordinary heat of the fall noon became a waterfall when Naruto clapped a hand on each of their shoulders. "I look forward to Monday. Bayo. It'll be your lucky day." Crow winced. Naruto then turned and walked into the bullhead. "And don't you dare think about my ass, lawbreaker. I have never swung that way and never will." In the end, the four students ended up taking a different bullhead as Raven and Crow kept looking up at the beautiful blue sky with fists clenched. Tayang had tried to enter the bullhead to talk to Glenda but had been pulled back by the twins. They didn't look down, but the message was clear. "You're suffering with us, you heathen." He actually began to cry and Summer was left confused all by her own. The past 5 minutes really didn't make sense to her. After all, he kept saying. Why did she leave with a guy wearing sweats? How does that even make sense? He doesn't even dress nicely or try to look good, I don't understand. Why? Why, indeed. Chapter end. Chapter 4 start. The weekend had passed quickly for Raven. After the trip to Vale, in which Summer fulfilled her goals of purchasing more ammunition for her scythe and a new jacket, Raven had been exhausted and had eaten dinner in the cafeteria and promptly turned in for the night. Sunday, she woke up at her normal time of 7 and had found her body mostly recovered and her aura at full, so she went for a run around the track, trained in the simulation arena offered by the prestigious academy until noon, and then returned to her room to find her 3 teammates sitting around playing a board game. She recognized it as a strategic game in which each player represents a kingdom and attempts to obtain victory by either capturing all the kingdoms, having the most resources and land, and, as a result, points, or by being the last one standing when the evil forces attack. Summer laughed in rivalry as she won a game. Apparently, it was their first game and Tayang and Crow had taken the loss with relatively good humor. It was their first time playing such a tabletop game and had found it interesting, so they played another. Having found themselves more familiar with the rules and gameplay, the second game was faster paced and intense as the three went round and round with their schemes and tricks, trying to outplay the other and force misplays as well from the other players. At the end of the second game, Summer was the last one standing as the other two were so focused on taking the other kingdom's territories that Summer simply had to wait for them to run out of resources and accept that they were removed from the games. Raven watched in avid interest, recognizing that this game was a simulation for real life. Not particularly perfect, but it was a good start for children to gain a keen analytical sense and force the best players to account for multiple scenarios for the future while considering moves from the other players. Sometimes, Tayang and Crow would forget a certain event was happening when thinking about the potential dangers the other two players had in their arsenal, or they'd get so lost in defending their kingdoms against the Grim that they'd run out of resources and Summer would plunge in at the first advantage. By the end of the 7th game, it was close to the end of the evening and night was falling. And the boys were heated and starting to become competitive as a simple passing of time with teammates became a battle for victory. "One more game," they said in unison, and Summer accepted happily. Raven noted that the victor seemed to preen in her victories, relishing her conquests with childish pride. Even though Raven was new to the game, she could recognize that the strategies the two boys employed were far better than the second game they played. Every additional game they played was an experience for them to use a different ploy or tactic, and they used their sharp minds to utilize different machinations. However, Summer always had an answer. It wasn't that she was particularly knowledgeable about the game. She had said it was her first time playing the game and had bought it at Vale out of curiosity. The interesting thing was that Summer always knew what was happening in the entire map and what was possible to come. She had considered practically every single possibility and had something akin to a sixth sense when it came to what the boys were planning. One particularly prominent memory was when Tayang pulled out a trap card on Summer, betraying her trust and attacking her kingdom after they had created a coalition. Summer immediately pulled out a counter card without a moment's hesitation. One of the weakest cards, as it was extremely specific and required an agreement between only her kingdom and Tayang's specific kingdom. The card would be rendered useless if she was in an alliance with Crow's kingdom or if the three had joined together. It was only when her and Tayang were together that she could utilize the card's active ability. "How what the heck?" Tayang had asked. Summer just gave him a look that displayed confusion. It was obvious. "Why else would you make an alliance with me?" When Tayang had explained that because of the impending attack of Grim and that neither of the two had enough resources to win and Crow was the only one with enough from the early game to survive, Summer raised her eyebrows. "I mean, that's true. We both could have possibly lost if you don't consider the cards in our hands, but if I accept your teamwork, I ascertain my survival and also prepare for the two of you to make mistakes." "How was it a mistake?" Summer then explained mid-game that Tayang had at least 3 opportunities during the Grim invasion to ensure his survival. He could have joined Crow as well, but didn't. He could have let a portion of his kingdom that had expanded to be taken at a loss and flanked the Grim. And he also had more than enough time to force a tariff, increasing his resources for a short period of time at the cost of lower potential resources in the future. "The fact you went straight to me instead of considering the other 3 let me survive and simply wait for you to outdo yourself. For that, I accept your kingdom and will now attack Crow with my increased forces and Elysian military, empowered by the machines you have upgraded, Tayang. Thank you for the win again." Just like that, Summer that went from the weakest region on the board to the victor in a matter of 2 moves. 1 reaction card and 1 move during her turn. The two boys sat still and dropped all of their cards on the board in defeat. Their shoulders slumped, their arms falling listlessly to their sides. "No way. There's just no way," Crow said. "This has to be luck. I'm just unlucky, right?" Tayang didn't even have words to say, letting out a stream of unrecognizable sounds that became more and more garbled. It was a string of unrelenting loss. A story of pain and defeat. An untold tale of a beautiful kingdom that had found its utopia and then its immediate end. Of which there was one a hero and one that pursued to be hero of justice and… "Shut up, Summer." Tayang shouted, returning to life so that he could end the girl's poor narration. He heatedly picked up the cards and said, "Again." Crow whipped his head up and stared at Tayang. "Again?" The other male across from the board met his eyes with resolve. "Again. There's no other choice. We cannot accept defeat, brother." Tayang brought forth his hand and Crow looked down at the proffered sign of alliance. He could feel tears threatening to break out of his ducts. "Again." Crow agreed, throwing his hand forward to slap Tayang's, and the two shook firmly. They flexed their muscles and brought their hands higher so that they were eye level, their arms bent at a 90-degree from leaning towards the other. An uncomfortable, evil-possessed laughter emerged from the two as they continued to stare into the other's eyes, drunk in their camaraderie. "We will defeat the evil witch and lay waste to all of her plans. If we team up every single time, there's no way that she could win." Crow nodded in earnest. "There's simply not a world or parallel universe in Remnant where she could defeat the two of us every single game. Eventually, we have to win. That's what we learned in statistics the other day, dumb class." This is what that class all amounted to. It was for this very moment. The fire set in their eyes, burning brighter than before. They turned to look at Summer, who grinned maliciously. Not one to be outdone, she picked up a handful of cards and began to slowly let them fall from her grip, one by one. I, the evil witch, accept the challenge you two fools have bestowed upon me. I grant you two the experience of defeat once more. She finished by pointing a finger between the two of them. Come, you weak peasants. I'll show you what a true leader of a kingdom is capable of. Quick, set the playing field. Crow roared. Pass out the cards. Tayang ordered. Prepare your fields for plowing. Summer commanded. You guys are dumb, Raven commented from the side. She was now sitting on a chair in reverse, her arms over the back support in a cross and her chin resting against a palm. Just start the game already. Crow glared at her. Shut up, sis. You don't understand what's at stake here. You haven't even played the game against that evil, vile woman. Summer, to her credit, had the perfect evil cackle in response. Look at that thing. He narrowed his eyes and turned to Summer with his cards hiding his lower face. You disgust me. He put down a card and the game commenced. As promised, the two boys made a treaty as soon as possible and unified in order to beat Summer. When she successfully thwarted their attacks on her kingdom, they waited for her to run out of resources. When that failed, they waited for the grim invasion to weaken her so that they could invade again. However, they had forgotten a key unit that Summer had left near their side of the board since the beginning of the game. Even Raven, a bystander who had full view from above and was generally more level-headed than the two boys, completely ignored the unit and had been considering other options. But this card, I use sneak into Atlas's kingdom and then use an additional card, hack, to force your bullheads and mechanical troops to join mine. And with that, you no longer have a fighting force, Crow. I use this opportunity to raise your kingdom and plunder your resources. Crow had grown paler and paler as Summer had laid down her cards, slapping them down. He turned to Tayang, fearful for the immediate future. Brother, help me, he pleaded. Tayang sadly shook his head and saluted him, a single tear rolling down his cheek. No, Crow let out, it can't be. Long live the king, the blonde first year said. He dropped his salute and let the tear slowly roll down his cheek until it reached his chin, only falling when he turned viciously to face Summer, who was laughing it up. I'll avenge you, brother. Brother. For victory. I activate my trap card. Good game, Summer said quickly, throwing a card in the middle. Tayang and Crow sat still leaning forward with their mouths open. The team leader dusted off her knees and stood up. Stretching her arms above her head, a few audible cracks were released, and she moaned in bliss. Wow, that was a lot of fun. Let's play again sometime. Summer's words kick-started Tayang's mind, and he finally rebooted. He looked down at his cards and stuttered, boo, but I have double your forces still and I have. Yeah, that retaliatory card only works if I don't have something to reject that card, which I do. The two boys frantically flipped over her cards and found her words to be true. And also, it seems you forgot that I have another unit near your kingdom, Tayang, and all it's waiting for is an empower card. The moment you attack me with your forces, it'll take your kingdom. I'll survive one more turn from your attack and you'll lose in the next one, so no matter what, I win. She smiled down at them and patted both of their heads. Good attempt though, gentlemen who would gang up on a woman. With that, Summer went to the bathroom to shower and prepare to turn in for the night. It was past 9, and tomorrow would be Monday. Another long day awaited them. The three left in the room were locked in silence for minutes. Raven looked down at the board, remembering the entirety of the last game. Summer had put those two units at different times, but both near the beginning. The boys had noticed, but she kept forcing them to think about other points of attack and defense, and had used psychological warfare to make them think that there were more pressing threats to deal with. Which was both right and wrong at the same time. As long as they didn't forget about the flanking troops on Summer's side, then it would have been fine. Alas, the threat became too much when it slipped out of their minds. Wow, you guys got destroyed. Her opinion was not well received. Raven was awake. She knew when her blood-colored eyes opened that it was probably closer to 5 in the morning than 6. Dawn had yet to come, and looking outside the window with a turn of the head showed her a campus that was dimly lit by street lamps and none by the soft glow of a rising sun. She closed her eyes and released the air in her lungs in a long, slow breath. Then, she lifted the sheets and swung out of the comfort of her mattress, slipping on some slippers, and walked over to the bathroom to prepare for the day. She was never able to sleep again after waking up, so staying in bed was a waste of time. 10 minutes later, she was dressed in her school uniform and had done her hair to her satisfaction. It was unkempt, but she liked it that way. It didn't take long for her to care for it, and it looked good enough. Silently, she left the room, making sure that the lock didn't make too much noise when she closed the door. Content that she had been so quiet that one could have heard a pin drop, she turned and walked down the carpeted hallways with the kitchen in mind. An early breakfast before all of the students woke up and took the seats was never a bad move. Before long, the smell of hearty and healthy breakfast wafted. She let a pleased smile lift her lips. There was something about the scent that was different. Perhaps there was a new cook in the kitchen. When she rounded the entrance, she discovered an empty dining hall with only one student sitting by her lonesome with a scroll out and a pad of notes with a pen atop the pile. Linda Goodwitch. The imagery of Tayang leering at her broke out of the recesses of her locked memories. Her smile quickly dropped to a frown that marred her features. Perhaps it would be her duty to rectify the image that their upperclassmen had of her team. Wait. Why did she care? It's not as if she particularly cared how others viewed her team, as long as she and her brother became stronger. The fact that Summer was chosen over her brother, her Tayang, did not particularly sting. In fact, she realized that she didn't really care. True, it would have been a good learning experience for how to lead a group of experienced fighters, as well as how to command properly so that she could applicate her knowledge to her tribe. But it's not as if she was losing too much value either. Also, if she were a leader, then she would have to show care to her teammates. She'd have to lead them and have her own type charismatic leadership that would make Summer and Tayang follow her. There was little doubt in her mind that Crow would listen to her order. He already did back in the camp, as she was in a higher position than he, despite the fact the two were both on top of the totem pole hierarchy. His bad luck had lowered his social standing amongst the tribesmen, so they only trusted him as a warrior. Even then, they were reluctant to fight with him, so the twins were usually a two-man group. Rarely were they separated, the two fighting dynamically, constantly switching and attacking with their own synergy. She couldn't be a leader here. She'd have to eventually leave them, and that could cause some issues. If she was simply a follower, however, it was far easier for her to eventually slip away. When the headmaster announced the short girl as the team leader, she had released a breath that had held all of her worries and fears of the future. She and her brother would not be shackled to Beacon by unnecessary responsibility. And it's not like Summer was a terrible leader. She was nervous, short on self-esteem, and rather inexperienced in hand-to-hand, but she had her own merits. She was always bubbly and cheerful, something she couldn't do and didn't particularly like, but it was starting to rub off on her, and had an insane appetite for cookies and ridiculously good at board games with strategy. Wait, aren't those all not leadership qualities? She raised a hand to her chin and looked up to the ceiling. Huh, what do you know? Those weren't leadership qualities. Raven shook her head. It really didn't matter in the long run. The missions that they had in Beacon weren't too dangerous, and there were always an experienced huntsman leading or shadowing. Very rarely did students go on their own for missions, and that was only during their 4th year. Otherwise, she found no reason to worry about the situation. 3 years down the road, she's sure that she's bound to be strong enough to handle anything on her own. Raven, is that you? The black-haired girl snapped out of her trance and looked down. Glenda had turned in her seat and was sitting with her upper body twisting to face her. The blonde 4th year smiled and waved. Why don't you sit with me if you have nothing to do? After all, it's early and we're the only ones here at the cafeteria. She paused, hesitating. In the end, she caved and walked in. She sat down next to the Glenda, who was finishing putting her textbooks in a pile and placing bookmarks in each separate textbook and notebook. Good morning. Glenda placed a sticky note on the last textbook and put all of the books in her book bag. Turning to her underclassmen, she smiled softly. Good morning to you as well. I'm sorry that the professor may have said some things to scare you, but I hope you enjoyed your trip to Vale during the weekend. Oh yeah, that Raven looked down at her hands. Honestly, she felt more awkward talking to the girl now that Tayang kept bringing her up the past 2 days. Vale was a nice enough city. She lifted her gaze and met Glenda's, who was patiently sitting with a warm mug of coffee steaming with little wisps. And Naruto didn't say anything. Crow and I forgot Arlene in the dorms and needed to go back, she lied. I see, Glenda said. Well, if that's the case, I apologize for Professor Uzumaki threatening you with an increased difficulty in your training. You're not the first he's done that to. The 4th year laughed, a lilt in her tone. Raven noted that the girl's laugh was as soft as her smile, quiet and refrained, but nice to listen to. She didn't seem to be the type of girl to giggle often. I would know. Raven positioned her elbows against the table and put both of the back of her hands against her chin, her head on a slight tilt. You would? Linda let out another amused chuckle. Oh yes, I would. After all, I'm the first person that thought the entire situation with the professor was a mistake by Beacon. Well, probably not the first, since all of us 3rd years last year thought that the situation was ridiculous. An egregious error by the headmaster, no doubt. Raven widened her eyes. No way. Aren't you, well, one of his supporters? You could put it that way. I'd rather state I'm one of his students. But 6 months ago I must state that in truth I did not believe that a professor at the age of 16 was nothing more than a poor joke on the side of this academy. A prank, if you would. I believe you'd find it rather easy to sympathize with my case. A 16-year-old teaching students 3 years his senior in combat. Not only that, he had never attended any school, had not received an education at any of the prestigious elevator schools in private or one-on-one, nor was he homeschooled. He said as much in his first day as he introduced himself. That sounds like something he would do, Raven said, thinking about her professor saying that to her class. Seemed completely reasonable. Glenda nodded. Some of the students were quite vocal in their discontent. I'm pretty sure you can guess what he did. He challenged them. He challenged them. And he's still here as a professor, so you can only imagine the result. The first year shook her head. You're telling me that he beat third years in hand-to-hand? Aren't you guys supposed to be experienced? She paused, reconsidering her wording. I mean, since you took missions throughout Remnant and had combat training for the past 2 years, I'm hoping someone got some hits in. Glenda kept that serene, graceful smile placed on her lips, knowing what the girl before her had meant to say. We were undoubtedly more experienced than you youngling first years. But no, I'd have to reject the notion that he beat us in hand-to-hand. Raven raised her eyebrow. But I thought you said he challenged you and won, since he's still here. The blonde nodded, her grin widening. I challenged him with my semblance. I don't mean to boast, but I'm the strongest person in my class by a large margin. When I stood up, I believe I did so with the intent to represent the entirety of our year. And I lost within 2 minutes. No one else threw down the gauntlet after my defeat. She tapped the table with her fingers, drumming it in a wave. To my credit, I do suppose I managed to chunk off 15% of his aura. Raven choked. She had heard of Glenda's exploits from rumors and other students, but seriously. Only 15% as a third year against Naruto 6 months ago. How stupidly strong was he? Did he use his semblance since you used yours? He did say that he used it, she confirmed. Raven leaned forward, engrossed. Did he tell you what it was? Or do you know what it is? He has not. And to this day, I'm afraid that I still don't know what his semblance is. It's one of the mysteries I wish to crack. I have a few theories, but every one of them have faults, so I had to start from scratch multiple times. But every once in a while, he'll give me a hint during an office hour. It was actually why I went in the first place. I wanted to find out his weakness so that I could beat him. As it so happens, I came to realize that the 16-year-old professor was exactly what he said that he was. A professor of Beacon Academy. I understood why the headmaster had given him the opportunity to teach at this distinguished academy, despite the risk it would come with. Imagine this. Headlines with the youngest headmaster Osborne allowing another youthful staff to join in before he had even proven his own worth to the public. It was sensational to the news, and journalists flocked to our campus to vie for a single question. Glenda actually laughed, reminded of a certain memory. In the end, the crowd had grown so large that Professor Uzumaki went up to the crowd and spoke to them and said, I am indeed the professor you are searching for. I am Professor Uzumaki. I believe that I am 16 years of age. Now please, Naruto's grin widened. Get off my lawn. And he walked away and into the staff communal area. Raven choked, trying her best to stifle her amusement. Eventually, Raven lost and burst out laughing at the recording Glenda showed her of her professor. But apparently, the video didn't end there. Yes, I'm Naruto. Are you a professor at Beacon? Yes, I'm Naruto. How did you end up becoming a professor here? Yes, I'm Naruto. Raven guffawed as the journalists became increasingly frustrated as the clips kept rolling, and Naruto refused to say anything other than yes, I'm Naruto with the blandest of tones. She dropped the hand supporting her chin and slammed a fist on the table, body shaking. You ha to send me that. Is it on Stube? Raven gasped out, fighting for breath. Glenda coughed into her hand, trying to hide her amusement. Yes. Here, give me your scroll and we can exchange contacts. I'll send you the link. Sure. Oh my goodness, haha, I haven't laughed that hard in a while. She pulled out her phone shakily and handed it over to Glenda, who quickly input her information onto the screen and handed it back. You linked our scrolls already? That was fast. The last vestiges of uncontrollable chuckling dissipated, but there was still a refreshing grin on her lips. And I sent you the link as well. I find it helpful to raise my mood whenever the day gets rough. Raven paused. You really do admire him, don't you? After all, why keep a link of the professor and watch it specifically when times get hard? The older girl smiled tenderly at her. It's hard not to. If there's something I learned in Beacon, it is that teams of 4 are exceptionally potent if they have seamless coordination. I believe my team is an outlier in the fact that our teamwork is split with me usually leading by myself and the other 3 following after, but it is still some form of teamwork with slight synergy. To be honest, I'm better on my own. But you see, a team of 4 would beat me on my own if they had synergy. With my team to support me, however, the other team stands no chance. It gives me the support I need to maximize my semblance and coordinate with my team in any offensive maneuver, however slight the collaboration is. She looked towards the kitchen, where the delectable aroma of food was growing stronger. But then there's our professor, who has been on his own. He shoulders his own responsibility and says he will and does it without complaint. He hardly ever asks for favors from the other professors and manages to hold office hours until 9 at night. And then afterwards, he ruminates in his room, contemplating what he should do to effectively train each individual student so that they could reach their max potential. Afterwards, he plans, trains, meditates, and closes the curtains for the night at midnight. And his day starts all over again at 5. To be honest, it gives me self-satisfaction to know that I'm supporting him and that he never stops being thankful. He is capable of doing it on his own, but like how I struggle against something that could easily be overcome with the slightest of help, I believe our professor would eventually buckle under the workload he places on himself. It may not be true, but I'd like to believe my help is preventing his self-combustion and allows him to continue to do his best to achieve his goal of molding the best huntsman possible. She turned back to Raven, who felt bewildered by everything Glenda said. Raven had grown in a tribe where self-sacrifice for the good of others simply didn't exist. It wasn't a noble cause. It was foolish. And there was no such thing as assisting others for free. There was always a price. But Glenda helped Naruto because she wanted to. That didn't seem quite right, but Raven couldn't formulate it in her head any other way. And that half-developed explanation didn't do her any favors and left her more confused. It simply didn't make sense. Ah, did I say something not to your liking? Glenda stopped, and Raven realized that her expression must have given the wrong impression. She shook her head and apologized, explaining that she couldn't understand. Ah, a light entering the blonde's eyes. I think the easiest way to say it is if you see someone doing their best and they keep moving forward, never faltering, do you not want to help them? The memory of her younger brother came to mind. When he was upset that he wasn't as strong as she was, he would eat his dinner and train deep into the night and come into the tent when it was closer to daybreak, exhausted. But he didn't say a word and no one called out his restlessness as long as he kept doing his duties. Eventually, she silently joined him. Neither of the two said a word to each other, but they understood what the other wanted. He wanted strength to support her, and she wanted to tell him that she would get stronger to protect him. It had nothing to do with favors. It was their bond. No matter what, they were still twins, and she wanted him to know that she was there for him in her own way. Even now, she wanted to become strong so that her brother wouldn't have to worry. Even now, when Crow was maturing and becoming stronger, she still recalled how he was when he wasn't so agile and comfortable in battle, and felt the need to protect her little brother. Yeah, Raven said mutely, her eyes downcast and vacantly examining her hands, rubbing her thumbs together. No, I get it. Maybe it's not the same, but I understand where you're coming from. Glenda watched the expressions shift from confusion to remembrance to acknowledge, and then finally a soft resolution on Raven's face. I'm glad, was all she spoke. The two sat in silence, one remembering an emotion she hadn't felt for years, her heart hardened from caging herself within, and the other tranquil and lovely, watching a flower bloom layer by layer. I hope I'm not intruding on any girl talk because I brought breakfast. Raven looked up and saw Naruto grinning at the two of them as he placed plates on the table. Omelets, waffles, banana bread and sausages all air before her in large portions. It smelled divine. No, you've come at just the right time. We were finishing up our girl talk, Glenda told him as the professor took his seat. Raven realized now that there were enough food for the three of them. He had known that she was there. Thank you for cooking again. No problem. Better me than you anyway, Naruto said, chuckling as he spooned some of the food onto his plate. He eyed Raven. You should eat, Raven. You have a long day ahead of you. Guilt wore at Raven's heart. She didn't want to stay. She didn't want to make bonds with people at Beacon. She was Raven Branwen, future leader of the tribe that she had left to become stronger. After she graduated, she would return to her tribe to lead them. It's only been 2 weeks in this stupid academy, so why was it that she felt like she cared about these two? Even if it was just a little, the feeling that she was taking advantage of their kindness and warm nature chipped away at her, bit by bit. She coerced the gloom back to whence it came and said, thank you for the meal, and filled her own plate. Taking a bite, she widened her eyes. Naruto could cook phenomenally. The flavors were bursting inside of her mouth in such a way that no normal omelet, sausage, or waffle should. She looked up to her professor. Not bad, she decided to say, schooling her expression. Naruto laughed from his chest, his head tilted high, his raucous amusement echoing from wall to wall. When he was done, he shook his head. I get Glenda to say that I'm the best cook she's met and that she'll help me as long as I make her breakfast every day, but I only get you to say not bad. You know what, I'll take what I can get. Thanks, Raven. No problem, Professor. She wondered if Glenda had actually said that. Perhaps I'll come to the dining hall at this time more often for this acceptable food if you're the one cooking. You could. This is actually a rare occasion. I ran out of lean because of what happened last week, so I came to the school's kitchen to cook. It's why this breakfast isn't as good as usual nor as healthy. Couldn't buy any ingredients at Vale the past weekend. But you got to do what you got to do. Usually, I cook in my room and Glenda joins me after she hands me the finished paperwork I delegate to her. You mean all of your paperwork, Glenda commented after swallowing down a bite of an omelette. Details? Who needs them? I do, Professor. Otherwise, nothing would get done, she quipped. Raven stilled, a fork full of sausage halfway to her mouth. He could make it better. Better than this. I could offer you some lean, Raven suggested. She and her brother had gotten a scholarship to the academy. Not only did they not pay a dime, but they also received funds for them to spend at their discretion. This was certainly something considered worth it, right? No amount of banditry would result in food like this, right? Naruto gave her a look that told her he knew exactly what she wanted, but he didn't call her out on it. Instead, he gave her the same, agreeable smile that Glenda had given her before and said, how about when I get my next paycheck, you come and join me and Glenda for breakfast. I'll make you say that my food is at least decent. Sound good? The cracks around her heart chipped away a bit more. I think I'd like that, Professor, Raven said. Her scroll buzzed and she looked down. A message from Glenda. Perhaps we could have more girl talk, too. I've never had another girl to confide in. These two were really something else. Chapter end. Chapter 5 start. There was a different kind of energy in the air in Beacon Academy. It saturated the air. The first years had finished their second to last class with history and now had 15 minutes before their last class. Usually, the students would take as much time as possible, preparing themselves mentally and physically for the arduous class. The students would refill their water containers, stretch for an extra few minutes, close their eyes and listen to music. Whatever they needed to do to focus, most of the students did, having already adjusted to the difficulty of the course. The students received pity from the eyes of the other Beacon students, knowing what Professor Uzumaki made them go through. The second and third years that were friends with the first years heard what Naruto made the young students do to train, and the usual response was, "That's harsh," or "That sucks," or even, "It was easier back in my day." Strangely, it was the fourth years, despite the fact that most of them still refused to let go of their pride, that were the least common to give the first years any kind of special treatment in the way of the second and third years. If anything, they were encouraging. Blimstone, who had made acquaintances with a few fourth years, had complained about his courses. He had changed since the lesson, doing his best to work on his blatant racism, to the delight of his history teacher and also to Naruto's approval, and had begun to take his classes seriously. He was exhausted by the weekends, but felt a sense of responsibility and actual satisfaction at his work ethic. The days went by, and he kept putting in his all, but Blimstone was slowly burning out. So one day, he vented to a few of the fourth years during a dinner. Expecting some sympathy, he did receive some. But not in the way he had wanted. "Yeah, it's tough," a female student agreed. Red hair with orange eyes. A sword user that was proficient in multiple sword styles and utilized a shield occasionally. "There's no doubt that the kids' class is the hardest one you'll probably take your first year. It was definitely ours. But it was also the most rewarding, looking at it in hindsight." A blonde male with blue eyes, who also used a sword but only used specifically a sword and shield that apparently was legendary and had been passed down for a few generations, nodded in accordance. "Exactly. I feel you, Glim. Seriously, we all do here. But all of the other classes are pretty much easy compared to Naruto's. We took all of the courses you're taking right now, and I'll be frank, don't ever think it's useless. Kid knows how to fight. But it's hand to hand only. What's the point?" Blimestone brought up, frustrated by the lack of weapon usage. Every day, it was always unarmed combat and basic strength training. Naruto continuously touted base strength and lectured the students that in order to utilize their weapon better, their body's conditions should be improved. And even if their semblance did not necessarily coincide with a person's constitution, a huntsman's skill without their weapon was invaluable. He couldn't see it. "If you use your hammer in a closed space that you can't swing quickly, what do you do?" the blonde asked. Blimstone perked up. There was an obvious answer. "You take it outside. You force the other to leave the enclosed space and take the fight into an advantageous location." "Yeah, that's ideal. But here's some more information. Suddenly, you're fighting in a hotel hallway and plenty of the patrons are behind you and you are the only person trained in combat. Your assailant is fast enough to zip by you after a single missed swing of your hammer and is not unwilling to take hostages. Now what do you do?" Blimstone froze. If that happened, telling the hotel patrons to run wouldn't accomplish anything if he couldn't stop the attacker. Neither would using his hammer. He would be gambling on hitting whoever was threatening him and the lives of the ones he would be protecting, and he wouldn't risk their lives with a gamble. That simply wasn't how Huntsman was bound to act. It was unworthy and unacceptable. His semblance was also utilized in larger areas, as it usually brought about damage to structures. You'd have to fight him with your fists. Maybe even your fists and your semblance if they are compatible, the Redeed told him concisely. She shook her head. In a scenario that could quickly become a hostage situation, your job is to protect the innocents that aren't able to protect themselves. No amount of weapon training would prepare you for a closed-space encounter unless you already have a weapon that can be utilized in a narrow space, which you don't have the luxury of. The female brought a finger to her lips as her eyes rose to look up in her thoughts. After a moment, she returned her gaze to the first years. Not only that, but your strikes are far faster when you don't have to swing with a hammer in general and only have to provide force from your body to your fists or legs. The wind-up is significantly reduced and you also have the additional choice of grappling if all else fails. At the very least, you'd be able to stall for time and possibly get help or even detain the attacker with a solid hold, something you can't do if both of your hands are holding the handle to your hammer. Satisfied with her answer, she resumed her meal and allowed the first year some time to contemplate on what the two of them had just explained to him. That's a lot to process. I never thought of it like that, he finally spoke after the sound of cutlery and general dinner commotion continued after a few minutes. He had sat in silence, breaking down every situation that the older students had told him, and they were right. They were absolutely right. The blonde student smirked. That's alright. You're young and you'll get plenty of chances to learn these things. We only learned this last year because that kid literally pounded it into us that we were being idiots. He never said so, but anyone that made a suggestion had to follow through with their suggestion in a simulation. It was honestly a pretty good learning experience for every one of us, and the guy never told us it was bad to suggest things, so we kept doing it. That way, we learned the better ways to approach each specific situation, and you don't understand that unless you experience it. You just don't. So, to his grand surprise, on the Monday of the third week of Beacon's first semester of the school year, he received a message on his scroll from Professor Uzumaki that said, "All first-year students in 10 great calisthenics exercises to build muscles must bring their choice of weapon to class today." That was a shocker. Unsurprisingly, every single student in the combat class was early and already stretching, their weapons at full display. The room was filled with electricity, and each student was eagerly anticipating to finally use the weapon that they had trained with for years in the arena. Limestone felt the same as the other excited students, but felt an odd premonition. After what the fourth years had told him, he couldn't shake off the feeling that the professor had planned to show them how useless a weapon was in certain scenarios and would use that lesson to make them all train physically for another few days. He hoped he was wrong. "I'm sure many of you are excited about finally gaining my approval for you to bring your weapons to this room. I thank you for your patience." Naruto stood in the middle of the arena garbed in black track pants with orange stripes and a black long-sleeved turtleneck that seemed somewhat baggy. His hands on his hips and a broad smile on his face, the professor looked each student in the eyes. Every pair returned his short gaze with sparks of hype. "The day is going to be different. It already is, since I'll be allowing the use of weapons in the arena, but today is strictly for your enjoyment. I will set team against team, and this will be it for the day. I hope that the students that are waiting give the students in the arena the respect they deserve by watching. After all, you may learn something from their fights." The silence broke immediately and the students buzzed, talking to each other about the plans that they had been wanting to bring out and could finally test. Summer was hugging her scythe and swooning at the blade's razor-sharp edge, speaking in a tongue that none of her teammates could understand. She spoke of certain machine parts and the metals used to create it and how it was so genius a certain shopkeeper suggested this and that and Raven sighed at her leader's antics, but she couldn't help but smile. She, too, was excited to finally bring out her adachi. It had been a long time since she had struck anything other than air, and this would be a great way to test how far she had come since her introduction to Beacon. And this would also stand as a great way to find out where she stood compared to the other students at Beacon with no limitations. The feral grin split her lips as her teeth came into view of the world. The prospect of a fight against another four-man squad made her blush rush. Similar to her were Crow and Tayang. Crow hadn't even had the opportunity to spar anyone yet, and Tayang wanted to redeem himself after the failure on the first day of classes. Team STRQ and Team GLDN, please enter the arena. Praise whatever gods existed above, Raven thought, because they were first. She didn't know how long she could let this feeling eat away at her. Earlier, of the room, she had denied stating that she was excited to her brother, but she was tapping her feet and her biceps. Her patience was running far too thin, and testiness was at its edge. Both teams jumped down to the arena. Summer readied her scythe as she slid into her stance, the girl standing combat ready with a choice of weapon literally larger than she. A wide, unadulterated smile graced her lips as she swung the weapon a few times experimentally. Satisfied with the weight in her hands, she spun the weapon in a flourish, the blade turning so quickly that it had become an impenetrable shield for that moment. Suddenly, she stopped the blade and pulled it close to her body so that it was parallel with the floor. She prepared for combat. Tayang breathed in deeply and closed his eyes. As he let out the air in his lungs unhurriedly, he minutely opened his eyes and slid into a stance. His left foot forward but the majority of his weight on the back right leg, Tayang lowered his center of gravity and raised both hands to chest level before separating the two. His right hand went closer to his chest and his left in front of his body. Finally, he twisted his upper body so that he was half turned away from the opponents. Crow looked over at his twin and gave her a smirk and an upward nod. Receiving a smirk in kind, he turned back to the opponents for the day with a grin as his weapon, a split between a large gunblade and split scythe, quickly locked into place as a connected blade. He raised his and placed it behind his neck and leaned forward and beckoned the other team, provoking them. Raven chose to remain simple. No feelings could interfere once the fight began. She would shut out everything else. Nothing else mattered but the present and each moment that came after. She slowly unsheathed her blade and brought it above her head, then steadily lowered it until the tip was exactly at the height of her crown and directly between the middle of her eyes. She had done this every fight since she was young, and it was a sign for her to remove everything unimportant. All the noises slowly faded away from her senses, other than the breathing of her team and GLDN's team. She opened her eyes, hyper-focused and prepared for combat. Before we start, here are the rules. The professor spoke loudly enough so that the entire class could hear. First, if your aura reaches the red, remove yourself from the field. Secondly, if you are forcibly removed from the arena, exit the battlefield. Thirdly, everywhere in this room except for the spectator section is fair game for this fight. Lastly, everything in this room may be utilized. He waited for a moment to let the students digest the information and then continued. If you all begin, we will commence the first team battle in 15 seconds. The seconds ticked down, and Raven felt her muscles contracting eagerly in anticipation for battle. She had waited so long to hear her blade sing in combat and for it to clash against another's weapon. She had also been practicing attempting to utilize Naruto's hand-to-hand training in tandem with her swordsmanship, and this would be the perfect opportunity to practice on other people. When the countdown reached 5 seconds, she started to channel aura to her feet. She would burst forward and blitz the opponents, and she knew that her brother would be directly beside her. As the last second was heard, she fine-tuned the amount, controlling the amount to perfection so that no amount of aura would be wasted, and slid her back foot further back so that she could push off it the millisecond Naruto gave the signal. Begin. Everything broke into action at once. But it was also over in the blink of an eye. Raven blurred forward, becoming one with the wind as she tunneled forward. Her black hair whipped back and the hair above her eyes split and flipped up, jet black locks flowing roughly behind her. Her brother was right next to her, his weapon behind his back, indicative that he was about to swing. The distance between the two teams in the beginning was only 20 feet before the fight began. By the time Raven and Crow were halfway across in only a split second, surprising the other team at their aggression and attaining all of their attention. Summer was already behind the opponent's team and had, having no attention drawn to her own personage, deftly tripped all of the opponents and swung her scythe across all of their backs as they were falling. 3 vicious quick swipes as she dashed an equal number of times by the time that Crow and Raven had even begun their first swing, which was now held back in hesitation as they watched their leader. She had torn through the distance before the blink of an eye and was on them and blitzing through their defenses before Team GLDN even knew what was happening to them. Stop. Team STRQ wins this bout. Even after Naruto had declared their victory, the bodies of the enemy team were still falling, hardly halfway to the floor. Team GLDN did catch themselves from hitting the ground face first, but that didn't stop their pride and ego from sinking lower than the earth. Their shock was displayed as clear as day. It was as obvious as saying that Summer was fast. Fast couldn't even describe the girl. A force of nature had come at them with all of its brutality and ended them without giving them a single warning. There was no moment's notice, and there was also no hesitation on the end of the team leader from STRQ. She had blitzed in, rushed them before they could even finish their first blink, and hadn't noticed her go around their peripheral vision and behind them, and had started to fall. All within 2 seconds. Tayang, on the other hand, had stood at his spot in a defensive position. He had expected Team GDLN to go forward towards them, and had remained still, and for that, he had been able to watch Summer's offensive capability unfold before him. She had been next to him, and a moment later, she was gone. In a heartbeat, she had streaked across the arena and rushed in a semicircle, moving so fast that she became unfocused in his eyes. A deep sense of inadequacy bubbled up from his chest. First, Naruto had beaten him so soundly that he had no choice but to accept that the blonde was his professor and more important as well as his better. After all, both of them specialized in unarmed combat from what he could tell, but he wasn't even close to the skill level of his professor. He was hoping that this team spar would be his moment to get redemption, but that was also completely shut down by Summer. She was standing victorious by herself, and everyone's eyes were on the team leader of STRQ. Whispers circulated, but she heard none of it. Confidence exuded from her in waves. For once, she was in her element and not at all perturbed by another's presence or the stares of her classmates. She was completely in the zone, and nothing could distract her from her. Raven strode forward towards her team leader and growled. "What the hell, Summer?" She wasn't sure why she felt a heat rushing across her body as her arms bristled to hit something. It was as if she had been stiffed out of something she had been promised. Not only she had seen Tayang's and Crow's faces was miffed and frustrated with what her team leader had done. They all had been looking forward to this moment for hours and it was gone in 2 seconds and only Summer had been the main participant. What? Summer's disposition changed reactively, suddenly breaking out of her confidence. Her teammate had closed the distance between the two of them, completely ignoring the boy sulking on the ground. Before Raven could reach her, the professor walked forward and stopped her. Raven's eyes narrowed even further as her eyebrows furrowed, set deep in hot anger. "Professor?" Before she could even explain her position, Naruto shook his head. The flames in her core that had turned white with heat suddenly went cold and sputtered out in that second. Her eyebrows rose and eyes widened in shock that she wasn't sure. He didn't take her side, though. But how was this fair? They had been waiting for hours after the message in eager anticipation, since they spent 2 weeks without their weapons in a combat class at Beacon, and they wouldn't get another chance for the rest of the day. Their class was essentially over. "She did nothing wrong, Raven." The professor furtively glanced at the other team, still on the ground, before returning his gaze to her. "Please, go back to your seats." It took all but a second to recognize why Naruto had momentarily side-eyed Team GLDN. He had been attempting to tell her without words to think of the other team's emotions. Their pain. Their embarrassment. If Summer had taken away her fight in only 2 seconds and snatched the victory, then their entire team had been on the receiving end of her offense and had lost in those 2 seconds. For a moment, she empathized. But what about her emotions? What about her hard work that had been shut down by her very own team leader? And what about her brother's emotions and Tayang's? Did they not matter as well? She wanted to say all of these things so badly, regardless of if the other students heard. Screw them. Was she being unreasonable? She knew she was, but she had to say something. In the end, Raven said nothing. She couldn't, not when the professor looked at her like that, practically pleading for her to turn around and walk away so that the situation would be diffused. A situation that she had started due to her impulsive anger taking over her. Simply recognizing that it was her fault riddled her with guilt, but also even more frustration. It was a vicious cycle. She needed to hit something. Anything. With extremely difficulty, she forced herself to walk away with clenched fists and only a huff to show her frustration. When she thought she was out of earshot, she let out a curse. One by one, the other students in the arena shuffled over to their seats, both teams in silent frustration over different reasons. Raven pulled out her scroll in an attempt to block herself from looking at Summer, but a message from Naruto foiled that immediately. It was a recording of the fight from when he vocalized the start to the end. Obviously, it was sent to the members of both teams and was meant to be learning material so that they could critique their mistakes and recognize what had went well. But that did little to quell her increasing frustration after watching the fight on her screen. Summer. She was both a mistake and the thing that had went well. To the enemy team, it was their mistake to let themselves be blindsided and defeated so handedly in such a short time frame. To STRQ, Summer had technically done a phenomenal job and should be awarded with praise. But Raven looked at Tayang and Crow in the corner of her eyes and saw what she didn't want to see. They had swallowed their own feelings and were trying their best to congratulate Summer weakly with thumbs ups and nods, with a few quiet words of encouragement. It was only her that refused to say as much, and it was entirely her fault that this atmosphere had pervaded her team and worsened the other team's emotions as well. Summer looked over to her and their eyes met. Raven immediately turned her head away so that her eyes bored into her scroll screen, but it was already too late. Summer walked over to her and then. "I'm sorry, Raven." She apologized. And she genuinely meant it. "Stop it, it's not your fault. I'm the one that has the issue here." But she said nothing. Guilt wedged between the crevices of every cell in her body as Summer solemnly took her seat so that Tayang and Crow were between her. In the end, she crossed her arms and tapped her bicep, but out of irritation now. "Okay, I know that was short match, but there were still a lot of things we could learn from it. Any guesses?" Naruto had donned his mask of comfort, which showed his pearly whites, coupled with a cheery disposition that could disarm most people's feelings of unease and discomfort. "Don't be beat in 2 seconds." One student spoke sarcastically. Naruto pointed a wider smile in that specific student's direction, and the male shrunk in his seat. Sorry. Anyone else have a suggestion? Noticing that the mood of the class had dropped significantly and that no one else wished to speak after what the first student said, Naruto decided that he would have to take charge. And speak to Raven later. Alright, let's break it down so that no one else makes these mistakes again. First off, I said that the entire stage is allowed for combat. Where you start the fight is also included in that stipulation. The fight doesn't begin when I say start. Simply from how you position yourselves, a fight could be swayed massively on one side's direction before a battle even begins. Understand what your team is capable of, and utilizing a formation that allows the maximum usage of each person's capabilities is imperative for effective teamwork and mission success. Both teams stood in a line facing each other, as if prepared for a duel. Fights aren't always duels, and unless your team actually does its best in a line formation, I wouldn't recommend it. On a similar note, the distance between the two teams was overcome by Summer Rose within a half second. I would recommend at least 50 to 100 feet so that no one is blindsided by something like a speed semblance. It also gives you time to respond to unexpected contingencies that will force you to readjust your formations or reform plans, which can be done within seconds with effective teamwork. Information is so vital that if you don't have any information on the opposing side, I'd recommend that you have even more space and take the fight as slow as possible so that you are able to know what your opponents are capable of. So please, utilize the entire space given to you if you are able. Fights are won on advantages beyond a huntsman's innate skill with their weapons and battle prowess. Finally, I want to end this lesson filled with critiques with a compliment. Naruto shifted his gaze and stared directly at the team leader of STRQ. Summer, would you care to explain why you ended the fight so quickly? For some reason, the stares didn't bring fear to her heart. Maybe it was the comforting smile from her professor that was encouraging her to speak without hesitation. Perhaps the thrill of victory was still somewhere in her blood. It didn't matter. Her professor wanted her to speak, and she wouldn't fail him now. Summer stood, the center of attention, and all eyes went from the combat instructor to her. Standing proudly, she said. Because I didn't want to give them a chance to fight back. Naruto clapped. For 5 seconds, he applauded her answer. Exactly. If you are capable of ending a fight before an enemy can even retaliate, why would you not? You save aura, you don't reveal any of your abilities other than you are fast and efficient, which would make others wary but not any more informed, and you prevent yourself from getting harmed on the chance that the opponents are stronger than you are. You don't even have to use lethal force. If you want to knock out or incapacitate and then detain the enemy, that is entirely your decision. You have the choice, and you dictate the flow of battle from the moment you attack preemptively, at least for a short few moments. And those short precious seconds could be what decides the winner. Naruto nodded at Summer and clapped again, as if she were the one that had said everything. Summer blushed warmly and sat down, suddenly feeling awkward. The red in her face was the same hue as her hair, a stark contrast from her normally pale face and white clothing. Raven's finger tapped increasingly aggressively. Now, there is more I could say, but I'm sure you all are growing bored from my tedious speeches. That said, can Team BRGT and Team King please enter the arena? Information. The more Raven watched, the more she recognized how vital it was. Naruto had said it in the middle of his criticisms, but honestly, she felt that he should have said it first. The amount of fights between the teams that were won and lost because of information or a lack of was every single one of them. In one fight that had drawn on for nearly 10 minutes, it was down to a one-on-one battle. A female student equipped with a single dagger and a male student that utilized a classic sword and shield. Both were edging towards their aura hitting red. A hit on either end would finish the match and determine both the victor and the loser. The two rushed each other and clashed at the center of the room. But the move he had not shown earlier, the swordsman disarmed the dagger from the other student's grip, leaving her weaponless. Moving in for the final blow, he leaned forward and raised his sword. The female student gracefully backflipped away. While the girl was in midair, Raven saw a glint coming out of the female's right sleeve. By the time she had landed, the fight was called and her team had won. The bright reflection that Raven saw was another dagger that was hidden in a sleeve and thrown before anyone could discern what it was. The entire time, the opposing team had operated under the assumption that she only had one dagger. Evidently, that was proven false, and they paid for it with a loss. But this additional information only added more questions now. Does her semblance involve creating daggers? Is she able to use both daggers when she fights, or does she only use one at a time? How many of those does she have on her, and how the hell does she hide those? Naruto, she noticed, seemed quite pleased. Raven didn't know how she knew the minute change in his expression implied that specific emotion, but she was able to tell. Something about the sleight of hand the student had utilized to achieve victory along with the misinformation seemed to make the blonde smile a bit wider than it normally was. Fantastic. That was an extraordinary finish, Lavender. He gave all of the students a bright grin and nodded at them, content with their showcased skill. Feel free to return to your seats. Your scrolls will have a recording of the spar in just a moment. When both teams were seated, Naruto once again asked for anyone to explain why the last few seconds of the fight were so fantastic. Summer raised her hand barely, and Naruto called on her instantly. Because of misinformation. Raven held in a scoff. Even she knew that. Would you care to elaborate on your answer? You're correct, but I believe you can say more. Summer nodded, taking the encouragement and using it to bolster herself. The entirety of the fight was taken slowly so that both teams could discern information from the other side. As a result, they slowly revealed their hands one by one. However, the last two standing still had another trump card in the last encounter, and the student with a dagger came out on top because she was expecting another trump card from her fellow student. The swordsman, if he had prepared himself for another surprise, would have been able to raise his shield in time. In the end, Lavender's team was victorious because she successfully hid her abilities until she was assured of her victory. Also, the ease in which she executed the final attack in which she threw the attack without looking at her opponent yet still hitting him with perfect aim implies that she had practiced it in the case she was ever cornered and would need to retaliate while creating distance. The whole class looked at her wide-eyed. They had been able to break down the first few points, but none of them anticipated for Summer to recognize that the purple-haired student knew that there was another trump card, nor that she had prepared that move specifically for defensive purposes. Perfect. Naruto laughed loudly and clapped again. I'll take it from there. Thank you, Summer. Raven scowled. She didn't know that last part either, and it frustrated her. Her visage darkened immensely when she saw her team leader's face burn red again after the professor praised her. What the hell is going on? And so it went on, with two teams called to face off and Naruto explaining something that could be learned from the fight. By the end of the class, Summer had raised her hand to answer 5 out of 13 possibilities. Since no one else had raised their hands, Naruto obviously called on her. And the youthful cookie-loving monstrosity got it right every single time with an answer that went further to recognize why a specific victory was impressive or a defeat was caused beyond what every student could recognize. Including Raven. Raven's finger tapping, over time, had become increasingly faster and more aggressive. She even began to tap her feet after the second answer Summer gave. She wasn't jealous. She absolutely was not jealous because she couldn't glean those details from the fights in the way Summer could. Absolutely not. Not because it was a possibility that her team leader, who she had assumed was just a random, bubbly student that had made it into beacon off her grades in classes and average combat skills, could potentially be a more effective fighter and tactical thinker than she was. It was absolutely not for that reason that she felt her blood boil by the end of the class, and Naruto had dismissed them all with an ecstatic smile and telling Summer how her final answer was exemplary. The class had even began to look at Team STRQ's leader as the blonde's teacher's pet of some sorts, but the girl had either not heard or didn't give two rats' ass about their opinions because she kept grinning like an idiot and blushing like mad whenever he praised her. And she couldn't tell exactly what she was upset about anymore. Was she jealous? Was she upset that she felt jealously in the first place? Was she upset that her strength was suddenly put under scrutiny by someone she assumed was inconsequential in a combat effectiveness perspective? She didn't know, and that was not helping at all. Raven Branwen. Please stay after class. Naruto said her last name. That did not lift her mood at all. Talking to her a lecture was the last thing she needed. But she sat and waited, ignoring the pitying looks of the other students and the whispers. She nodded minutely when Crow and Tayang told her that they'd wait for her at the dorm room so that they could get dinner together, but she refused to acknowledge Summer when she said the same. Soon, the room was devoid of all life except her and the professor. She remained sitting, refusing to move from her spot until called. Raven, why don't you join me? Well, crap. Now she didn't have a choice, did she? She pinched the top of her nose and sighed before giving herself up to whatever Naruto was going to say to her. Might as well get this over with. She jumped over the ledge and landed easily on the lower level of the room. Soon, she was standing on the arena, only a few feet away from Naruto, who was giving her a soft smile. Are you alright? That took her for a loop. Wasn't she in trouble for causing issues and making the class atmosphere worse, so that teaching was more difficult for him? You're not in trouble, if that's what you're wondering. Damn, was she that obvious? You're really that obvious, Naruto said, easily reading her facial expressions as they shifted from one to the next. Okay, stop doing that. What's going on? She asked. Naruto shrugged his shoulders. That's what I'm asking you. What's going on? I know why you were upset earlier, but I could literally feel your emotions gradually worsening throughout the class, and I don't know why. She raised an eyebrow. Right. You could literally feel my emotions. Naruto nodded. Literally. It was getting pretty aggressive. Literally. Another confirmation. Maybe it's just that time of month, Professor. Naruto's smile softened even more and his disposition changed again. If he had a disarming smile before, then now he gave one that practically could melt anyone's defenses and bring them to his side through sheer charisma. He walked over to the edge of the arena and sat down so that his legs were over the edge and his legs were dangling as he swung it back and forth. I don't think so. Sit with me and let's chat for a bit. Raven didn't know what to do. She scratched the back of her head, shaking her hair in the process. A few seconds went by and she had yet to move, but neither had Naruto. He just sat there patiently with his back to her, his legs still kicking back and forth in childish pleasure. Glad you could join me. Shut up. Don't make me regret it, Raven snarked back, only a foot away from Naruto's side. She raised a fist as a threat, but that only made the blonde chuckle. Do me a favor and listen to this old man's ramblings, would you? Raven thought she did well to ignore the voice in her head, saying something about how Naruto was younger than she was, but what did it matter? She said nothing. I care about my students more than anything. I suppose any other professor here would have given you additional homework or a punishment for the way you acted, but I simply can't do that because I understand you. When you put in so much effort and it gets nullified by another person in a single flash with hardly any effort because they're so much more skilled than you anticipated, I know that feeling well. Raven, I'm not going to mince words. What Summer did was absolutely the correct move in my perspective and she already knew that she could do it instinctively. If she can do that here, she can do well for herself in the real world as long as she keeps that same drive and conviction. As long as she follows through with her logical ideas of finishing off a threat before it even becomes tangible, then she's a huntsman the moment she graduates, and a damn good one at that. And her mind for battle is precocious and unnaturally mature for what she has experienced so far, that I have a hard time doubting that she'll be the best leader that Beacon has seen for a long time and possibly for many years to come. Osborn was correct in his decision. That stung a little. Tayang has the charisma, but he doesn't have the same knack for tactics that she does. Crow is capable, but he follows you earnestly, and switching that kind of dynamic would take time that would be better spent on either giving the leadership to either you or Summer. Raven knew what was coming, but it didn't stop the pain. Seriously, didn't she ask for Naruto to not make her regret sitting next to him? But, you're impulsive and don't think things through completely before you say things and make decisions. You see things in your perspective or face value sometimes, and that sometimes is all it takes to fail one day. And I, as your professor, never ever want to hear that you failed in the future. Summer can look at a battlefield and recognize what needs to be done like, he snapped sharply, that. She sees out of the box solutions that you and I wouldn't think about. Like on the day I taught the class how strong a faunus was, the moment the fight started and right before the lights turned off, she ran into the bleachers. No one noticed, and I never said she couldn't go to the spectators section of the room. It fell in line with disengaging when the disadvantage is too large and bent my rules only slightly. A bend in the rule I had to remedy today specifically. Naruto turned to look at her, but Raven kept her head down in shame. She was expecting to get upset if he lectured her, but torn down by every correct argument he had and feel depressed. When Naruto began to compliment Summer and explained why she was chosen as team leader over her, she had to will her eyes to remain dry as she blinked rapidly. Her eyes were locked onto her hands, the two interlocked tightly and resting atop of her lap. And the thing is, she hasn't even shown us everything she has yet. In my perspective, she's probably more capable than plenty of the third years and a few of the fourth years as she is now. The only thing she lacks is self-confidence. Raven's neck fell even lower. That's not fair, right? He finished for her. The blonde chuckled, the irony not lost on him. People would think I'm unfair, given that I'm younger than the entire class and a professor already. But that's just how life is. Maybe to even out who I am now, in a previous life, I was a dead last, and that I had a teammate that was so ridiculously talented and beloved by the entire kingdom that I just had to beat their face in to prove I wasn't weak and a dead last. Wouldn't that be something? She nodded half-heartedly. Yeah, sure would. Naruto paused, if only for a moment to gather his thoughts and to consider his next words carefully. It's difficult when I know you put work in, Raven. Probably more work than any other student in the class, and I know how it feels, but I can't give you favoritism and let your team fight again today. That's simply unfair to the rest of the other students. She understood. Didn't mean she didn't felt like absolute shit hearing it from her preferred professor's lips. Damn, she didn't even have the motivation to hit anything. Maybe she'd eat and stretch and call it a night after this was all over. But it's just too bad she was looking down, because she would have seen Naruto's grin take a different meaning. A certain smile that had haunted many of Osborn's dreams due to certain extravagant pranks. Dude, I could disguise a spar as a punishment after all of the students leave, and it's only the two of us. The pit in her stomach that was as dense as a neutron star and had gone to the very core of remnant suddenly reversed its properties and became as light as the gas that she breathed. Her bloody red eyes were connected with Naruto's in a split second, hope and eagerness shining through. See? Impulsive and true to your feelings. Raven immediately turned away and coughed into a closed fist. She returned to looking dejected, albeit significantly better than before. Was that supposed to make me feel better? She asked, her tone sullen but her feelings anything but. Apparently, she did a poor job of masking how she really felt because Naruto was openly laughing at her. I believe it already did. Now, do you want to spar? I'll show you how far hard work can get a person compared to natural talent. The black-haired Adachi wielder was standing before he even finished asking. In fact, she was in the middle of the arena, waiting for him to call the fight. Come on, Professor. I don't have all night. My teammates want me to eat dinner and I need my beauty sleep. And don't hold back, she said, trying to hurry him up. He eventually fell into his usual combat stance and smirked. Maybe I'll hold back a little. Wouldn't want to make you ugly now, would I? Wah. She was promptly kicked in the chin, very much similar to how Tayang was on the first day of class. While she went flying through the air, she heard him scream at her. Lesson number 3, MS. Branwen. Don't let yourself get taken by surprise. This goddamn professor. What even were the first 2 lessons? By the way, please try to make things right with Summer. You two are teammates and I would be very thankful if you could be a point of confidence for her. She'll grow and because of that, so will you. And if that isn't enough to convince you, I sparred with you as a favor, so do this as a favor for me. Raven noted that the favors were unequal but decided not to mention it. Knowing Naruto's character, it was clear that he didn't care about that but more about the well-being of his students. Yeah, sure. I'll try, she croaked from her spot on the ground. She was beaten and breathing hard with her back flush against the ground, the sweat sticking to her shirt and skin and pooling on the floor. She'd need a nice long shower after this. Raven picked herself up and pulled her hair back so that it wouldn't get in the way of her eyes. Thanks for the punishment, Professor. I appreciated it. You're welcome. And please, don't say it like that, Dadabeo. I'm uncomfortable already. Naruto, to his credit, actually did look rather out of place with the way she worded her thanks. I'll try, Professor. Don't just try. Do. I'll try, Professor. Oh, for Kami's sake, go home already. Who's Kami? Raven. Go. Home. You. Lost. Child. Fine, fine. I'm leaving, see? And she was. When she was at the door, the professor called her name. What? Don't feel too bad I called you impulsive. True, impulsive people tend to have faults, but they're also usually the most honest and straightforward. And I like that about you. Sincerity. Warmth. Raven and Naruto were the only ones in the large room and she stared at him in silent shock, unsure what to say. Wah. Bam. I could have gotten you again. And whatever sentimentality Raven had felt, it was all gone. Obliterated in that moment. She flipped him the bird and left the room. Somehow, though, she still heard the next words he said. And I'd hate to watch honest people become jaded. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I won't become jaded. She shrugged her shoulders and winced immediately. Perhaps telling him to not go easy on her was not the best course of action. Raven was sore everywhere and exceptionally low on aura, but even so, her spirits were soaring. She hadn't gotten a hit in at all, but that didn't stop her from grinning the whole way back to her dorm with bruises all over her body. For all of her troubles, she had gotten a whopping 1% off the blonde. They would spar until she was either knocked out of bounds or hit hard enough that she'd struggle to recover, which he would then end the spar until she asked for another. This would go for another 30 minutes. Before long, she was in front of her room and the sound of her teammates screaming excitedly reverberated. Well, I use my blue eyes white dragon to defend. That doesn't exist. Tayang, shut up and give me your kingdom. Summer yelled. No. The cries of a man dying truly were desperate. Raven swore she heard his pitch go up an octave for a moment there. Don't do it, Summer. Don't attack my kingdom. I attack your kingdom, QROW. The sounds of cards and objects being flipped over was crystal on her end of the door. How do you win 16 times in a row since we started playing? This is BULLSH. Skill. It. She killed me first, Crow. Every single game, she killed me first. Please just for one game, let me survive longer than Crow. No. WHYYYY. The three would keep going like this and Raven stood outside the door completely still. These were her teammates incredible. And that was the girl that she was upset with. Ridiculous. Breathing in deeply, she grabbed the handle of the door and opened it. Immediately, the three voices stopped as one and the inhabitants of said room were looking at her owlishly. They saw her dripping, sweaty form and were about to ask what had happened but thought better of it and remained silent. Raven stared at the mess in the room caused by the pandemonium that had started after one of them flipped over the tabletops, and she really tried her best to not say anything, but nothing. She wouldn't say anything of the sort. They could always clean the place up after she took a shower and had dinner. Then, they could clean up and she would stretch, study, and call it a night. But first, she had to make an apology. "Summer," said girl immediately sat straighter. Crow and Tayang both straightened up as well. I'm sorry. I know what I did wasn't what you all wanted and I wanted to wait for you to come back so that I could apologize to all of you. Wait. This is all wrong. Summer wasn't supposed to be apologizing, she was. And I know you all look so forward to fighting, but I just wanted to prove that I could be a good leader and show that I was strong in it all. It's Raven. Okay, she had barely been able to decipher the last portion of what her flustered team leader had said, but she got the general gist of it. Why would she feel the need to prove herself, though? Summer wobbled to her feet. She gathered her courage after taking a calming breath. The past 2 weeks, I saw you do everything with intention. You practice your swordsmanship every night. You sleep early and wake up early. You manage your studies so that you could relax on weekends and rest. You always eat healthy, no matter what options the cafeteria has. You challenged the faunus in Professor Naruto's class in a way that wouldn't upset them and lifted the mood immediately. And on the first day of class, you managed to land a hit not true, but she wouldn't interrupt. And I felt so inadequate as a leader. You were just so cool to me. So I thought, Summer, today is your day. But I didn't think that it would make you so upset. I'm sorry. The boys were rapidly switching their focus between Raven and Summer. The shorter Reed had shut her eyes tight and shoved her arms to her side with her shoulders hiked up. The only thing she lacks is self-confidence. Naruto's words rang sharply in her head. It was her responsibility to fix this misunderstanding and help her team leader with her glaring weakness. After all, she had promised her professor. Summer, I'm flattered you think of me in that light, but I'm not that great. She stepped forward and shut the door behind her. Summer opened her eyes and looked flabbergasted. What? But you. Raven raised her hand to stop her, and she did. I actually wanted to apologize to you. What happened today was my fault. I ruined the mood of the team and blamed you when you did nothing wrong. The blame is entirely on me and I was a bad teammate. So for that, I'm sorry. Crow looked at her as if she'd grown 2 more heads. Raven promised to stab him with a fork at dinner later. Not hard enough to go through his aura. Just to give him a little scare. Or a scar. 1 letter difference. Well, that's wrong. I'm sorry. Summer was adamant on her position and her fear had long subsided away. What? Raven didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. The boys now looked back at Summer as if she'd grown 3 heads. Okay. She wasn't equipped to deal with this. She wasn't a Naruto or a Glenda with defusing situations. She was Raven Branwen and she had no clue what to do, so she did her best. I accept your apology. Summer sighed in relief and sank to her knees. Thank you so much. The girl even had the gall to clutch her chest. I didn't know what I'd do if you didn't accept it. The black-haired female's confusion was only augmented by this response. Raven couldn't help but feel like she had cheated somehow. Like she had somehow failed a task successfully, however that worked. She needed a cold shower. What the hell, Summer? She gave up for the day. She'd try to be a better teammate tomorrow. Chapter end. What if Naruto teaches at rwby? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.